Chapter 477. What candy are you eating? Dake turned his head and sniffed. Deanna took out a piece of candy wrapped in brown candy paper from her pocket and waved it in front of Dake. Plum candy. Then she unwrapped the candy paper and stuffed it into Dake's mouth. Dake opened his mouth slightly and bit the candy. A trace of sweetness and sourness flowed into his mouth, and there was even a trace of coldness, which made the heat dissipate a little. How is it? Bear Candy House's heart-piercing plum candy. Do you feel a trace of coldness? Deanna came over and asked. Dake tasted it carefully and said, Is it peppermint? Deanna shook her head and said, No, it's ice heartgrass. Its coldness can last for a long time, and it prevents the heat. Dake felt it again and said in surprise, It's true. Right? Deanna said proudly, I like it. While the two were talking, the vampire's daughter sitting on the right side of Dake stared at Deanna's pocket the whole time. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. Deanna glanced at it, then took out another piece of heart-piercing plum candy from her pocket and stuffed it into the vampire's daughter's palm. The vampire's daughter closed her fingers, but raised her other hand. Deanna was stunned, then took out another piece of heart-piercing plum candy and stuffed it into the vampire's daughter's palm again. Thank you, sister. The vampire's daughter beamed with joy. Then, she handed one of the heart-piercing plum candies to her little sister. The Phoenix girl took the candy with a cold face and stuffed it into her mouth. While Deanna was looking at them, Aurora, who was sitting on the right side of the vampire's daughter, poked her head out and whispered, Sister Deanna, do you still remember me? Of course, cousin. Deanna immediately grabbed another handful of candy and stuffed it into Aurora's hand. She moved from Dake's left side to his right side. She was almost lying on Dake's body, but she didn't care at all. Aurora helplessly caught the handful of candies. Thinking that Deanna had only given the vampire daughter 2 candies, she suddenly felt warm in her heart. Then she said gratefully, Thank you, sister. Deanna sat up straight again. She straightened her back and patted her bulging chest, acting like a good sister. After all, I am a sister. It felt so good to have a younger sister. In the past, she had always been the one being taken care of. Now that she finally had someone to take care of, there was no need to mention how comfortable she felt. Aurora did not know what Deanna was thinking. She just felt that her cousin was a good person, and someone she could rely on. In this place where she had left her home, not only did she have Aunt Camilla by her side, she also had a cute cousin whom she could rely on. This greatly diluted the fear hidden deep in her heart. While they were getting along well, Camilla and her team members stopped at the door and waited for Arvette and Claire to come over. In this way, everyone who should be here was here. Arvette had never been a strict master, so the atmosphere in the Duke's mansion was not as serious as in other noble mansions. She had also tacitly agreed to the maids coming to watch the battle. However, as a duke, it was not suitable for her to host the competition, so she handed it over to Claire. Claire grabbed Galileo by the neck and threw the fat cat whose limbs were hanging down in front of her. Then she walked up to the stage. Then she took out a pre-drawn schedule from her bag and pasted it on the wall. The words on the schedule were very large. If you focused a little, you could see it clearly. Dake glanced at it and said helplessly, I thought that today's duel would be random. It seems that I was too naive. Why is my name there? Diana was the only one who was dumbfounded after looking at the competition schedule. It was obvious that Camilla did not tell her that she was going to participate. Dake explained helplessly. Aunt Camilla said that she wanted to check the results of your month of training. Speaking of which, you also learned Chi? Yes. Deanna nodded. But it's the same as not learning it. It doesn't feel any different. Dake could not help but roll his eyes and look at the schedule again. There were a total of 8 contestants participating in today's duel. The competition used the simplest single elimination system. The winner would advance and the loser would leave. The final champion would receive a mysterious reward. As for the schedule, it had already been drawn up. The order of the battles was Dake vs. Horned Eagle Man, Deanna vs. Meow Meow Dilu Beast vs. Lion Beast, Aurora vs. Scabbard. It was obvious that Arvette and Claire had a clear understanding of Dake's strength. Thus, they very kindly chose the only opponent that he could defeat. In other words, if he lost, it would be his own problem. But if he was lucky enough to win, even if Meow Meow was proficient in swordsmanship, it might not be Diana's opponent. Not to mention, it was only learning small skills very quickly. It could only be considered to have grasped the basics. Thus, if Dake was lucky enough to win, there was a high chance that he would have to face Diana. There's no chance of winning. Dake could not help but frown. He had actually been thinking about this problem last night, but in the end he still did not have an answer. In a situation where one could only use martial arts, there was no way he could defeat Diana. Hatcha! Suddenly, the horned eagle man's extremely excited voice came from the opposite side. Dake turned his head and met the eagle man's eyes that were filled with fighting spirit. He could not help but feel refreshed. That's right. I might not even be able to win a duel with the horned eagle man. Let's do our best. Thinking this, Dake patted the hilt of his sword at the horned eagle man's waist, a provocative look in his eyes. It was probably the only time in the world that someone would look at their own Magister Fairy with such a provocative look. My opponent is Meow Meow. Diana stared at Meow Meow with her eyes wide open. She was not thinking about the battle, but how to capture it. As for Aurora, her expression was slightly more serious. She had practiced with the scabbard for so long, so of course she knew how powerful it was. It was an opponent that could not be underestimated. As for the Diru beast and the lion beast, they just looked at each other, then turned their heads and held on to their respective sword hilts. Although the lion beast had the ancestral demon sword, Lion King Pill, he still used a practice sword without a sharpened edge. He was at the same starting point as the rest of the contestants. The basic attributes of the Diru beast and the lion beast were very similar. This time, the winner and loser would depend on who had better control of the sword. Seeing that the contestants below the stage were already bursting with fighting spirit, Claire gently flipped her long hair and smiled. Everyone is clear about the rules. I will remind you one more time. You can't use weapons other than the practice sword. You can't use magic cards, and you can't use ultimate skills. This duel is purely a contest of strength and skill. There is no life and death, only victory and defeat. Then the contestants of the first group, Dake and the Hawkman wrestler, will be the first to come on stage. Before she finished speaking, Claire had already taken the lead to clap. As the audience, the maids immediately responded to the call. Their applause gradually boiled and flew out from the open ceiling. Dake stood up from his seat and walked to the middle of the field. After listening to Camilla's instructions, the Hawkman wrestler also stepped onto the field. As a magus, Dake and the Hawkman wrestler, who was a magic fairy, were about to start the duel. As the opening song, Hawkman wrestler, please advise. Hatcha! After the man and the fairy saluted, they both retreated, leaving a distance of about 10 meters between them. Dake had already pulled out his practice sword. His feet were slightly open, and his sword was in the air. His posture was very stable. Perhaps it was talent, or perhaps it was hard work. In short, he didn't slack off in learning the basics of swordsmanship. At this moment, he already had the appearance of a swordsman. He carefully felt the operation of the 3 chakras in his body, and gradually expelled all distracting thoughts. He fully focused on the duel in front of him. It was as if he was on the stage of a magic duel. The moment the countdown started, there was only the duel in his heart. Opposite him, the Hawkman wrestler also put on a stance. However, he didn't have any weapons in his hands. He was fighting with his bare hands. Because he wasn't good at wielding a sword, he gave up on practicing swordsmanship after a few tries. Instead, he switched to learning fist techniques from Camilla. He was extremely talented in fighting and had been practicing by himself. Now that he had Camilla's systematic guidance, he really improved by leaps and bounds. Just by putting on a stance, there was a kind of aura that suddenly emerged. It gave people the feeling of an eagle swooping down with a ferocious aura. The maids' voices gradually became softer. The maids who were cheering for the young master also closed their mouths. This first duel was unexpectedly serious. On the other hand, Arvette and Camilla stood together and observed the situation with great seriousness. Camilla asked softly, "Yelvette, who do you think will win?" Yelvette frowned slightly and said, "Dake has a higher chance of winning." "That's not necessarily true. Camilla's lips curled up slightly. Yelvet immediately became more careful. Seeing that both of them were about to enter a battle state, Claire suddenly shouted, "Don't overdo it. Let the duel begin." In an instant, while her voice was still echoing, the two people in the arena moved like lightning. Dake had never had the experience of fighting with his original body, but he had rich combat experience. This made up for his shortcomings and allowed him to fight without the slightest nervousness. The Hawkman wrestler was a magic elf born for battle. He spread his wings. Although he didn't fly, he suddenly accelerated. His right wing flattened out like a blade, splitting the air into two sides. When the distance between the two sides narrowed to a certain extent, Dake suddenly stomped his feet, and a cyclone instantly formed under his feet. Then, the three chakras in his body rotated at high speed, and the ki stored in them instantly exploded, flowing through his limbs and bones in an instant. Under the amplification of this ki, his physical fitness was already extremely close to that of the Hawkman wrestler. This was a feeling of power that would intoxicate a first-time ki wrestler. However, Dake already had the experience of armed evolved moon god, so he couldn't be confused by this level of power. His mind was like a mirror, and the practice sword in his hand flew out at a mysterious angle. However, the Hawkman wrestler suddenly lowered its head, and its originally less than a meter-tall figure instantly became shorter. Its right wing, which had been accumulating power for a long time, turned into a blade at that moment, and mercilessly cut at Dake's ankle. Dake, who didn't expect the Hawkman wrestler to attack his lower body, instantly became chaotic. He tried his best to spin to the side, trying to avoid the Hawkman wrestler's attack. However, in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, his left ankle had already been hit. A wave of sharp pain immediately assaulted him, causing Dake's face to turn cold. However, he clenched his teeth and fiercely chopped down with the sword in his right hand, aiming for the Hawkman wrestler's back. The Hawkman wrestler had no way to dodge this strike, and it immediately staggered down. However, it actually took advantage of the momentum to fall to the ground, and then with a roll, it escaped Dake's attack range. Dake wanted to chase after it, but the sharp pain in his left foot made it difficult for him to take a single step. In this predicament, Dake's fighting spirit didn't retreat, but rather increased. He immediately transferred even more ki to his left foot, causing the sharp pain to lessen. He then forced himself to move, stabbing at the Hawkman wrestler once more. His swinging speed was extremely fast, even faster than when he was practicing. However, the Hawkman wrestler's fighting spirit was extremely high, and before its body stabilized, it raised its left wing to block. Although it suffered a huge impact, it still managed to block it. Meanwhile, its right wing didn't stop at all, and once more attacked Dake's ankle. "Did you teach him this?" Outside the arena, Yelvet couldn't help but ask suspiciously. However, Camilla, who had been talking loudly just now, blushed slightly. "How can you frame others for no reason? I didn't teach him this." After hearing this, Yelvet couldn't help but shake her head. "This is the most suitable way to fight. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Camilla, I really didn't teach him." Using the avatar's disadvantage as an advantage, he attacked the Hawkman wrestler's lower body while he was unprepared. The Hawkman wrestler was only quick-witted in battle. It knew that without the unexpected enhancement, it would be impossible to hit Dake's ankle again. However, all of this was just a cover for the real killing move. And sure enough, as expected, Dark immediately used the method of retreating backwards. As a result, his attack was interrupted. The Hawkman wrestler's eyes flashed, and he suddenly exerted force with his feet on the ground. His entire body actually charged up from below, toward Dake's chin. At this time, if Dake continued to retreat or lean back, the Hawkman wrestler would be able to pursue and attack continuously, forcing Dake into a desperate situation. However, Dake didn't do as the Hawkman wrestler expected. He didn't even dodge. After retracting the long sword in his right hand, he suddenly raised it high, held the hilt with both hands, and slashed down like lightning. This slash didn't have the slightest bit of sloppiness. However, this slash was like hitting cotton wool. The Hawkman wrestler had used its two wings to block the top of its head at this critical moment, barely protecting its vitals. However, its body that was in midair was still struck down, and it fell heavily to the ground. Dake Dimming, who had completely overcome his fear during the battle, waved his sword with a cold gaze and pointed at the Hawkman wrestler's throat. The Hawkman wrestler lowered its hand, thoroughly convinced. The outcome had been decided. 2-1 4000 plus, 92/233. Give me the money, good night. Chapter 478. Hiss, Dake clenched his teeth. The pain coming from his ankle made him cry out in pain. Is it that painful? Deanna chewed on the candy and looked at Aurora, who was applying the magic potion on Dake. Aurora looked up and said, Orthopedic magic potion. It can seep into every inch of the bone. No matter how small the wound is, it can heal. It is just a little irritating. Oh. Deanna nodded. The Hawkman, who had just been defeated, stood on the side with his wings behind his back. He looked apologetic. Obviously, it had also been hit hard by Dark, but its heart was filled with disdain for its master. On the other side, Arvette and Camilla crossed their arms in front of their chests and looked at them warmly. They were obviously satisfied with the performance of Dake and the Hawkman. As for the outcome, it was not within their consideration. Remember the website, MVIP, can't you? 6 After all, the contestants at the end of the month had a big gap in strength. Under the restrictions of the rules, it was not easy for Dake to defeat the Hawkman. The rest of the competition would be left to the other contestants. On the stage, Claire looked at the situation and raised her voice again. She announced, "Thank you to the 2 contestants from the previous round for the exciting match. Now let us welcome the next contestants. These 2 contestants are the naughty and cute Meow Meow, and today's special guest, Deanna." It's my turn. Deanna jumped up with excitement. Although she did not know that she would be going on stage, after watching the duel between Dake and the Hawkman, she was undoubtedly eager to fight. Dake glanced at her and asked, "Do you use a sword?" Deanna opened her eyes wide and looked around. Then she nodded and said, "Sure." Dake took the long sword from his waist and threw it over. "Take it." Deanna caught it and pulled out the long sword for practice. Then she leaned the scabbard against the chair and went on stage. On the other side, Meow Meow was also ready. When it stepped onto the stage, its expression was solemn and cautious. Among all the students in this cohort, his mastery of basic swordsmanship was the best. However, when facing Deanna, this advantage of swordsmanship was not enough to overcome the absolute gap in strength. Moreover, it didn't know Deanna very well and didn't know how good she was. If he wanted to win, he had to go all out. Meow. Meow Meow had already unsheathed her sword. Unlike Dake and Hawkman, they didn't walk to the middle of the field to greet each other before parting ways. The 2 contestants stood 10 meters away. Claire took the opportunity to shout, "Let the match begin." Deanna and Meow Meow moved almost at the same time. However, the movements of both sides were completely different. Deanna only took 2 steps forward. Her movements were not fast, but her posture was very stable. Meow Meow, on the other hand, chose to charge forward at high speed. The short sword in its hand was extremely agile. When the 2 approached each other, Meow Meow suddenly leaped forward. The short sword aimed at Deanna's face. However, Deanna only raised her hand slightly and successfully blocked the attack. She looked at Meow Meow, her eyes shining. With a shake of the long sword in her hand, she forced Meow Meow away. However, as soon as Meow Meow's feet touched the ground, it pounced forward without hesitation, the short sword in its hand stabbing out like rain. Deanna's face was full of excitement. She also waved her long sword, defending herself impenetrably. The sound of swords colliding rang out intensely. The situation was obviously different from when Dake and Hawkman were fighting. Deanna didn't rely on her natural strength to suppress Meow Meow at all. Instead, she skillfully used her swordsmanship to fight. At this moment, the skills of both sides were displayed incisively and exquisitely, and the gap between them was gradually revealed. After all, Meow Meow was only a beginner with less than 2 weeks of practice. There was no way it could compare with Deanna, who had already touched all kinds of weapons. Therefore, although it was very unwilling, in the end, Deanna found its weakness and put her sword to its throat. The winner and loser was decided. After Meow Meow was defeated, it didn't return to Camilla's side. Instead, it frowned and went to Dake. Dake hurriedly hugged it and comforted it in a small voice. "It's okay. You're already very strong." Meow. Meow Meow threw its sword away and climbed onto Dake's knee, curling up. Dake stroked its back and continued to watch the match. After Deanna and Meow Meow's duel ended, the third match quickly began. The duel between the Diru Beast and the Lion Beast could be said to be a contest of the same attribute and level. After the two magical spirits entered the arena, they looked at each other seriously for a while before suddenly drawing their swords and clashing. The same basic swordsmanship, in the hands of different people, displayed a completely different style. If Meow Meow's swordsmanship was the embodiment of skill, then the Diru Beast and the Lion Beast belonged to the strength type. Therefore, when they clashed, it was very intense. For people who didn't understand them, it would be hard to imagine that the petite 4-star Diru Beast actually had a stronger basic strength than the Lion Beast. The same strength-type swordsmanship, but the Diru Beast was clearly more nimble, while the Lion Beast was more steady. Under the full attention of the people outside the arena, the two magical spirits fought for a full 15 minutes before the winner and loser could be determined. The Diru Beast, who had been secretly practicing every night, finally obtained an advantage with its hard work. It didn't let this hard-earned advantage slip through its fingers. Instead, it steadily expanded it bit by bit until it finally hit the wrist of the Lion Beast that was holding the sword. Then, it quickly rushed forward and took advantage of the fact that the Lion Beast's right hand was not clenched tightly to knock away the sword in its hand. Thus, the winner and loser were decided again. The Diru Beast, who had obtained victory after a hard battle, proudly raised its head. The Lion Beast looked at its empty hand and felt extremely dejected. However, it couldn't run to Dake for comfort like Meow Meow. Although it really wanted to in the end, it still silently picked up its sword, sheathed it, and left the arena. Of course, it subconsciously returned to Dake's side. "Well done." Dake gave it a thumbs up. The Lion Beast was a little surprised, but it felt a little happy. Then, it felt a pain in its heel and suddenly turned around, only to find that the Diru Beast had kicked it. When the Lion Beast's eyes revealed a wronged expression, the Diru Beast raised its eyes and fiercely glared at it. Its heart suddenly trembled, and like a little kitten, it lowered its head and slipped into the crowd of magical spirits. The Diru Beast also stood at the side. The fourth match was between Aurora and the Sword Scabbard. The Sword Scabbard was a 4-star magical spirit with an attack power of 2,200. Moreover, it could float in the air and was very fast. It wouldn't be restricted by the sword wielder's body. Facing this kind of opponent that she had never seen before, Aurora, who had also only practiced swordsmanship for 2 weeks, couldn't help but feel nervous. But when the battle started, Aurora showed an extremely strong talent. Whether it was her on-the-spot reaction or her control of swordsmanship, they were both very good. Although in the beginning of the battle, she was unable to adapt to the Sword Scabbard's 360-degree seamless sword, and suffered setbacks, she relied on her strong physique to endure. In the end, after a bitter battle, she successfully turned the situation around and defeated the Sword Scabbard. A magical spirit without a killing move is indeed a little lacking. After watching the whole process, Dake couldn't help but shake his head slightly. Although the Sword Scabbard's body was considered top-notch among the 4-star magical spirits, its core was still a killing move and a characteristic that belonged to a holy sword. It was more suitable to become the sword of the strong, and not the strong themselves. After the winner of the fourth match was decided, Aurora returned to her seat. She closed her eyes and panted slightly, allowing her mood to quickly calm down. For her, this battle was actually not small. Winning the first match allowed her to have a clear understanding of her talent and strength. Therefore, she slightly raised the goal of this month-end summary: win another round. Claire looked around on the stage. After confirming that Dake and Deanna could go on stage, she opened her mouth and said, "As everyone can see, the first round of the competition is finally over. The winners are Dake, Deanna, the Diluvian Beast, and Aurora." As expected of the most popular magical spirit, the Diluvian Beast's performance was very wonderful. Of course, our Deanna and Aurora sisters also performed very well. I think everyone is very much looking forward to the final result. Who will be able to walk to the end and obtain the mysterious gift that the Duke meticulously prepared? Let's wait and see. Now let's begin the second round. Let's welcome the winners of the first round, Dake and Deanna. Clap, 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 clap. The maids applauded vigorously. Below the stage, Deanna winked at Dake and whispered, "It's our turn." "Yes, it's our turn." Dake took a deep breath, picked up the lion beast's sword and stood up. Although he was already mentally prepared, when it really came to this moment, he couldn't help but feel sad. Perhaps this was the determination of going to the mountain despite knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain. Da-da-da-da. Immediately after, Deanna also stood up with his sword. However, unlike Dake, who looked calm but was actually dead inside, Deanna was very happy inside and out. As the two walked into the arena, some of the maids couldn't help but snicker. Yelvette and Camilla sat on the bench with smiles on their faces. As the mothers of the two on the stage, they didn't have the mood to compete. However, Camilla still smiled and said, "Yelvette, how is it? Who do you think will win this time?" Yelvette blinked and said, "Do you still need to ask? Of course, it's your family's Deanna." Camilla's mouth curved slightly and said, "That's not necessarily true." Yelvette smiled and said, "That's what you said last time." Camilla said, "That was last time. I know my daughter quite well." Yelvette also smiled and said, "I know my son very well too." Camilla said, "Then let's wait and see?" Yelvette smiled and said, "Let's wait and see." The conversation between the two mothers didn't affect the situation in the arena. After Dake and Deanna entered the arena at the same time, they stood 10 meters apart from each other. "It's about to start." Deanna gathered her energy and said. Dake nodded from afar. On the stage, Claire smiled slightly and raised her right hand. She slashed down and shouted, "Let the battle begin." Before she finished speaking, all the eyes in the arena were focused on the arena. As for their young master's duel, the maids certainly had to watch it carefully. As for Dark's magic elves, they also focused their attention. Although they felt that Dake's chances of winning weren't high, they still hoped that he would win. "Whether I win or lose, I'll go all out." Dake made up his mind in an instant. He took a step forward and the airflow from his 3 chakras surged all over his body. It was as if he had cast a body-strengthening spell, and his physique was improved. Then he shook his sword and took the initiative to attack first. Deanna didn't use her explosive aura, but her aura was still rising and she flew over like an arrow. This was very different from the strategy she used to deal with Meow Meow. Dake held his breath and focused. He staggered his feet and prepared to use his footwork to go around her and avoid a frontal attack to win. But halfway through, his expression suddenly froze and he stopped. Deanna's left foot stepped on her right foot. When she raised her right foot again, she lost her balance and fell to the ground. Smiley face, angle, Dake. Deanna, who fell face down, slowly got up. Then she looked at Dake with an innocent expression and said, "Hey, hey." Dake lost his will to fight in an instant. He rolled his eyes and put his sword back into the scabbard. He raised his hand and said, "I admit defeat." Deanna was confused. Claire shook her head slightly and announced, "The winner has been decided." Dake walked to Deanna, bent down and held out his hand to her. Deanna put her hand on his and stood up obediently. "Okay, don't do this next time." Dake patted the dust off her clothes one by one. "Okay," Deanna replied in a low voice. She didn't know what to do. Dake led her back to her seat. When they sat down, Deanna couldn't help but raise her head and say, You have no problem." Dake sighed. "It's my problem." Aurora watched the interaction between the two with her eyes wide open. Suddenly, she felt an indescribable sense of alienation. It was as if Deanna and Dake were surrounded by a layer of membrane, making it difficult for others to get in. They clearly looked like they had a conflict, but it gave people a feeling that their relationship had become even more intimate. It was very, very difficult to describe. What's going on? Aurora racked her brain to think. She suddenly realized that she had been taking things for granted when it came to relationships. A fantasy without practice was ultimately just a fantasy. The two parents on the other side were exchanging flirtatious glances. Yvette didn't think about it at first. It wasn't until Camilla hinted that Dake might win that she thought that Deanna might go easy on her. But she knew that her baby would definitely not accept a victory in this way. So the final result would still be the same. It was just that she didn't expect Deanna to go easy on her in such a simple way. She really let herself fall. This is too cute. If it was someone else who did this, she might have a bad impression. But when it was Deanna, she liked it more and more. Especially when Deanna was obedient and reflected on herself. Slurp. Unlike Yvette, Camilla was seriously thinking at this time. Because she suddenly realized that there seemed to be a problem with the way Deanna and Dake got along. But she couldn't tell what the problem was. So it became more and more troublesome. What's going on this? In different thoughts, the second match of the second round was about to start. Aurora, who was still thinking about other things, still didn't pay attention when she walked on the field. And her opponent, the Diluvian beast, obviously paid more attention to this match. Thus, after entering the arena, the Diru beast withdrew its gaze from the corner of its eyes and focused on its opponent. Match start. Claire, who was on the stage, ordered. But the two sides in the field didn't move. After letting out a sigh, the Dilu beast suddenly called out, "Sister Aurora." Aurora turned her head to look at it. The Diluvian beast stepped forward with its sword and said in a low voice, "I'm going up." Aurora was shocked by its momentum and suddenly came back to her senses. The Diluvian beast immediately stepped forward and sped up. Clang. The swords of the two sides instantly collided, and then immediately separated. Then it was as fast as lightning. The two sword auras exploded and exchanged more than 10 moves. Then, they both exerted their strength and retreated at the same time. Both sides took the same stance, the tips of their swords facing each other, and their gazes were solemn. Without using explosive aura, Aurora could already compete with the Diluvian beast, whose 3 attributes were no lower than a 5-star magic elf, by relying on the aura that naturally merged into her body. Once explosive aura was used, she would instantly surpass the Diluvian beast. Under the situation of the same level of swordsmanship, the scales of victory and defeat were already tilting towards her. But she didn't do that. Since it was a competition of learning results, she shouldn't rely on things other than learning results. The victory brought by explosive aura wasn't the victory she wanted. The battle situation suddenly changed. Both sides' swordsmanship improved rapidly in the evenly matched competition, and became more and more exquisite. It was obviously just basic swordsmanship, but it derived many different moves, which were pleasing to the eye. Dake, who was watching from the sidelines, had already calmed down. Failure was expected, and it wasn't hard to accept. Next time he would let Deanna go all out. After calming down, he began to pay attention to the performance of his magic elf. As an archmage, the magic elf was the true display of strength. The Diluvian beast's performance was more dazzling than he had expected. Should he say that it was worthy of being called a hero? Whether it was its mastery of swordsmanship or its characteristic of constantly improving in battle, it was very well reflected in its body. The Diluvian beast will win. The moment this thought appeared, Dark saw that Aurora had made a mistake. It was a real mistake and not a trap to lure people into a trap. The Diluvian beast took advantage of her mistake and tried to use its continuous swordsmanship to break Aurora's defense. Aurora's face was slightly pale, and panic appeared on her face. In the end, she couldn't stabilize her footing, and there were more and more flaws. In the end, the Diluvian beast relied on its rich combat experience to defeat her. The competition entered the next round. 5000 plus? Next update before 6 o'clock, including today. You can't slack off. Next is a long-awaited PY letter, not counting the words, from an altruistic warrior fighting for betrothal gifts. Hateful. Chapter 479. The excitement of the Dilu beast and the disappointment of Aurora formed a sharp contrast. The slight difference in swordsmanship and the lack of combat experience led to Aurora's eventual defeat. But this didn't mean that Aurora was weaker than the Dilu beast. According to the rules of this competition, she could have exploded. It could only be said that her principles were really strong. After leaving the arena, Aurora sat back on the bench. Because the vampire's daughter ran back to the Phoenix girl's side, she sat on the right side of Dake. Dake saw that although she was disappointed, she wasn't particularly depressed, so he didn't ask more. When the Dilu Beast came back, he took out the Dilu Beast's magic card from the card bag and shook it. "Take a break." The Dilu Beast nodded, took off the sword and handed it to him. Dake took the sword and shook the card again, and the Dilu Beast returned to the card. "Remember in 1 second. https://m, but can't you? VIP." Then he drew a magic circle and quickly replenished his magic. When the Dilu Beast's magic was replenished, he summoned it again. At this time, the Dilu Beast that appeared, except for a little mental exhaustion, had already recovered to its peak state. After it raised the sword again, it looked at Deanna and raised its eyebrows. Deanna had just undergone a deep reflection, and now she was still bashfully thinking about random things. Until the Dilu Beast's eyes shone on her face, she raised her head vigilantly. At the same time, Claire's voice was heard. After experiencing unexpected twists and turns, this competition held to test the learning results has finally entered the final stage. Although I want to pretend to be excited and shout a few words, being a referee is really boring. So now, let's welcome the special guest Deanna, who successfully advanced to the finals, and the white cat who just defeated Aurora. The Dilu Beast. Applause thundered. Deanna and the Dilu Beast looked at Dake almost at the same time. Dake said, "Go up, and watch them enter the arena with their swords." No matter what kind of thoughts Deanna and the Dilu Beast had, once they entered the arena, they would be opponents. The Dilu Beast stopped 10 meters away from Deanna, then raised its sword and said, "Victory favors those who are prepared." Deanna held the hilt of her sword and frowned. "You have to be able to control it." The Dilu Beast shook his sword and said, "Then let's try it." There was an inexplicably tense atmosphere between the two sides. Dake was fully focused, placing his hopes of victory on the Dilu Beast. That fervent hope became the Dilu Beast's motivation. The battle was about to begin. "Begin," Claire promptly announced. Both sides did not hold back in the slightest as soon as the battle began. Their swords were like torrential rain as they rained down thunderbolts. Deanna understood the strength of the Dilu Beast the moment the two swords collided. She immediately restrained her gaze and pushed the surging chi back into her chakra, maintaining the most natural state. But even so, her strength was still higher than the Dilu Beast. Both of them had innate divine strength, but Deanna was clearly more pure than Aurora. After she controlled her chi, she completely let go of her hands and feet. Every sword strike was like a bear's paw, firm and heavy. Because of this, the sword vibrated and spread to the area between the thumb and the index finger. After only 10 rounds of confrontation, the Dilu Beast felt that the hand holding the sword was slightly sore and numb. It was aware of the difference in pure strength, so it immediately changed its tactics and added a strange change to its swordsmanship. The Dilu Beast's flexibility was originally higher than its strength. Compared to Deanna, who was always straightforward, it had no doubt that it had an advantage in this aspect. Using one's strength to attack the enemy's weakness was a normal strategy. There was no doubt that its adjustment was effective. It gradually recovered its disadvantage, and even gained a little advantage. This caused the entire battle situation to become complicated and confusing again. Dake crossed his hands and was still seriously watching the battle. The Dilu Beast's performance had far exceeded his expectations. The battle with Aurora had not only boosted his confidence, but he had also made great progress in his swordsmanship. Fighting is really the only way to improve. The Dilu Beast's current level of swordsmanship has probably surpassed Meow Meow. I originally thought that it would surpass Meow Meow, but I didn't think it would be this fast. Meow Meow's technique expert allowed it to grasp small skills much faster than others. But swordsmanship was not just a collection of skills. The more profound it was, the more important it was. Meow Meow would gradually lose its advantage. At that time, the Dilu Beast would definitely catch up from behind. But now it had been brought forward. In comparison, my swordsmanship is too clumsy. Dake was originally satisfied with his results in the past 2 weeks, but the worst thing was to compare. With the Dilu Beast and Meow Meow in front of him, he was extremely mediocre. But thinking about it carefully, wasn't the magic elf's swordsmanship his swordsmanship? So there was no problem at all. The situation on the battlefield changed rapidly. Not long after the Diru beast gained the advantage, it suddenly found that Deanna was also adjusting her tactics. Her adjustment was not gradual, but was very consistent with her style of bold and decisive. It was as if in the blink of an eye, her swordsmanship had completely changed. It went from straightforward, using strength to oppress people, to extremely delicate and nimble swordsmanship. The Diru beast was unable to adapt to the sudden change in her style, and the small advantage it had just gained was instantly destroyed. If it had not adjusted in time, it might have already lost. This child, only her battle talent is unparalleled. Outside the arena, Camilla saw her precious daughter's outstanding performance, and couldn't help but reveal a proud expression. Then she teased herself. To be honest, I really don't know how she got to 5th place in the entire grade. It seemed to be teasing herself, but Arvette could hear the aura of Versailles in it. But Arvette quickly said, Camilla, after this match is over, can I ask you for a favor? What favor? Camilla asked doubtfully. Arvette slowly said, from tomorrow onwards, I will teach Dake the method of forging equipment, but I actually don't know how far his research on forging equipment has progressed. If possible, I hope you can test it for me. Camilla paused for a moment and asked, why don't you do it yourself, or let the enchanted fairy do it? Arvette explained, if it's me, I won't be able to control it. Camilla couldn't help but laugh. Don't joke, you won't be able to control it? Arvette smiled. What I mean is I can't do it. Camilla was momentarily stunned, then she rolled her eyes. As expected of you. Then why don't you use the enchanted fairy? Arvette said. The enchanted fairy is not accurate. Forget it. Camilla shook her head. You always have a reason. Camilla didn't have much contact with Arvette before, so she didn't expect this Valkyrie to be such a troublesome woman in private. She crossed her arms and turned her head to continue watching her precious daughter. Both sides were using the most basic swordsmanship, nothing more than a combination of footwork and technique. There were no complicated or profound swordsmanship, nor were there any magic swordsmanship mixed with magic. There was only the sound of metal clashing that became more and more intense. The Diru beast was inevitably at a disadvantage. Deanna had already begun to follow up with her victory. The entire situation was tilting towards Deanna's direction. The Diru beast's disadvantage was becoming more and more obvious, while Deanna was becoming fiercer and fiercer. Dake, who was staring at the arena, frowned slightly. The reason for this situation was very similar to the previous battle between the Diru beast and Aurora. It was all due to the difference in combat experience. Deanna's background and family background allowed her to accumulate experience even if she didn't specifically learn. The Diru beast, like Meow Meow, was a beginner who had less than 2 weeks of practice. To be able to fight with Deanna to this extent was already very difficult. Among the Great Bear family's peers, there weren't many who could gain an advantage over Deanna, but the Diru beast's goal was clearly not to show off. It wanted to win. Among all of Dake's enchanted fairies, the Diru beast's desire to win was one of the best. It was the embodiment of pride, the embodiment of dignity. Results other than first place were meaningless to it. But everything couldn't be done overnight. It was too difficult for a beginner to win against the Pearl of the Great Bear family. Although the Diru beast tried its best, it still couldn't find a chance to turn the tables. Facing Deanna, who was getting fiercer and fiercer, it was defeated again and again. Finally, its sword was pushed away, and the fatal flaw in its chest was exposed. When the tip of Deanna's sword was pressed against the Diru beast's chest, the Diru beast chose to face defeat. It didn't throw a tantrum like a child. Instead, it calmly put down its sword. Victory and defeat were decided. Thank you to the 2 contestants for bringing us such a wonderful visual feast. Finally, congratulations to Deanna Greatbear for obtaining the final victory. Your reward will be given out later. Please come to the Duke to receive it. Claire clapped as she walked off the stage. The job of the host and referee was really not easy, but it was finally going to end. Just as she was thinking this, Silver Wolf Knight, Camilla walked towards the arena. Claire couldn't help but stop and look at Yvette, who was standing outside. Yvette nodded at her. Claire could only return to the stage and continue her part-time job. Camilla walked to the center of the arena and high-fived Deanna. "Well done." Deanna scratched her head. "I was lucky." Camilla couldn't help but laugh. "What, you learned to be humble?" "Mom," Deanna grabbed her mother's arm and acted like a spoiled child. "Is there anything else you want?" Camilla nodded and smiled. "Next is my turn." At this time, the Diru beast had returned to Dake's side. Although it looked calm on the surface, Dake could clearly feel the disappointment in its heart. Therefore, he stretched out his hand and grabbed the Diru beast, who was pretending as if nothing had happened, and walked towards the crowd of magician elves. After the Diru beast was in front of him, Dake smiled and asked, "You also lost?" The Diru beast's eyes turned red, and its emotions exploded. Dake patted its back and said, "I also lost." Then he said, "Then let's work together and win next time?" The Diru beast smiled through its tears. "Okay." 3100 plus 94/233. I wanted to write more, but I'm too sleepy. I'll write after I wake up. Chapter 480. The tears of defeat were sour, but the fruit of love was sweet. For the first time, the Diru beast let go of its stubbornness. In front of Dake, it acted like a child who was born less than a year ago. Not the most sensible and least worry-free big sister. The magic elves couldn't help but want to comfort it. Even the lion beast who lost to the Diru beast couldn't help but want to cheer it up. However, the mood breaker suddenly appeared at this time. After Silver Wolf Night, Camilla dealt with Deanna. She walked over and looked down at Dake. "Dake, do you want to fight?" Dake raised his head and showed a surprised expression. Camilla smiled and said, "The Duke wants to see your strongest weapon." "Strongest weapon?" Dake slightly frowned. Camilla said, "Fighting is the best way to test it. Your mother wants to know how far you have progressed in your research on armed gear forging. Of course, you can also use your weapon." As she said this, she raised her hand and pointed at the single scabbard floating in the air. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP Dake's eyes became more dignified. "In other words, remove the restriction of weapon and armor?" Camilla nodded and said, "You can understand it that way." "That's good." Dake patted the Diru beast's back and stood up. The Diru beast wiped its tears and looked at the single scabbard floating behind Dake. The single scabbard popped out a blade and reflected a trace of light. The Diru beast nodded at it and stretched out its hand. The single scabbard immediately flew into its hand. Then the Diru beast took the single scabbard and handed it to Dake. Dake took it and picked out 3 cards from the card pack. They were single scabbard, Moon God Solai, and Wishful Dice. He used his thumb and forefinger to hold the 3 cards. He rubbed his fingers and spread them out in a fan shape. Weapon and armor. I only have these 3 cards to use. Camilla carefully looked at the 3 magic cards. After fully opening her chakra, she immediately sensed the unusual aura from the 3 magic cards. She revealed a slightly surprised expression, then turned to look at Arvette and said, "Arvette, why don't you do it yourself?" Arvette shook her head slightly. Camilla teased, "I'm just joking." After saying that, she asked Deanna to watch from the side. Then she smiled at Dake and said, "I didn't expect you to be able to create such a powerful weapon in your first year." Dake replied with a smile, "After all, I got my mother's treasure." Camilla nodded and said, "I heard her mention it before. It's the Triad Armament Refining Array, right? It's rare for you to learn how to use it." Dake said, "I failed many times before I managed to figure something out. I was just lucky." Camilla shook her head. "How can there be so much luck? Come, it's time to go on stage." After saying that, she turned around and walked to the center of the field. Actually, she had seen 2 of the 3 magic cards in Dake's hands. For example, the scabbard was one of the students in the study group that she was in charge of. She already knew that the scabbard could transform into a weapon form. However, she didn't expect that the Moon Lady could also be a weapon or a weapon. "I really can't see any traces of it." Camilla knocked on her forehead. She felt that she might have been too relaxed after the battle. and her senses were clumsy. However, in fact, it was the divinity that overflowed from the moon god's soul that blinded her senses. As early as when the moon god's soul was arranged to be in Ms. Cook's study group under the name of the Moon Lady, 3 of the 4 tutors had noticed that this magic fairy was extraordinary. However, the silent sage Cyrus was more obsessed with observing the intelligence of the magic fairies, while Ms. Plant was addicted to the infinite possibilities of the trash slime and the big milk cans, herbivore sure-kill skill, so she didn't pay attention to it. These tutors who had passed the trust review at the beginning had absolutely no problems with their personalities. They definitely wouldn't be greedy just because of a God's card. A God's card. And it's a weapon-type God's card. And he refined it himself. Camilla stopped at a suitable position. Then with a flick of her finger, she pulled out a weapon card and released it on the spot. It was similar to Yalvet. Camilla was also proficient in many kinds of weapons. Among them, she was best at fists and feet. However, in a battle, she would use a spear. As the light of summoning dissipated like stars, a divine spear that emitted a faint silver glow appeared in Camilla's palm. The structure of this divine spear itself wasn't too unique, but the handle of the spear was engraved with black runes. The spearhead was cast with a transparent metal material that could completely let light pass through. Once it danced quickly, the spearhead would disappear from people's vision, causing the enemy to make a fatal mistake. Moreover, it didn't have a spear seal. The entire spear was one thick long, and emitting a domineering aura. The name of the spear is Fenrir. Camilla lifted the spear lightly and said slowly, "Fenrir?" Dake carefully observed the spear and felt a trace of threat from it. Fenrir was a giant wolf in Norse mythology. It swallowed and killed the king of gods, Odin, during the twilight of the gods. Of course, that was a myth from his previous life. In this world, Fenrir was a legendary demon wolf. Its greatest feat was swallowing the moon. The divine spear named Fenrir might be related to this point. I'm afraid it has the ability to swallow magic power or vitality. Dake thought for a moment and deduced something from the short information. Then he raised his hand and whispered, "Single scabbard weapon form." Clang! The single scabbard immediately retracted its ribbon, closed its eyes, and transformed into a weapon form. Although holding a holy sword couldn't unleash its internal characteristics, the ability on the surface was still enough. The sure-kill skills combo slash and sword dance, even if it was a weakened version, couldn't be underestimated. Moreover, Dake would become a 6-star magic guide sprite after equipping it. It could obtain an attack bonus of stars x 300. "Aunt Camilla, I'm going to start." Seeing that Camilla stopped after conjuring the Fenrir spear, Dake reminded her. The corner of Camilla's mouth curled up. A trace of battle intent that had been dormant for many years appeared in the depths of her eyes. "Come, let me see your divine weapon." Outside the arena, after Deanna and Aurora heard Camilla's words, they were both shocked. After Dake went on stage, Deanna squeezed to Aurora's side and started talking as if they were close friends. At this time, Aurora couldn't help but ask, "Sister Deanna, Dake actually has a divine weapon?" Deanna looked away. "How would I know? I'm just a bear." Aurora paused and quickly said, "It's normal that you don't know. After all, the divine card is a top secret in the hands of ordinary people." But when the two were talking, a small head popped out from between them. The vampire's daughter said cheerfully, "Hee hee, so Sister Aurora didn't know?" "Me?" Aurora turned her head and said in surprise. "Yes, yes." The vampire's daughter nodded repeatedly. Then she quietly pointed at the moon god's soul that hadn't moved and said secretly, "It has always been here." "It?" Aurora turned her head with confusion. When she saw the vampire's daughter pointing at the moon god's soul, she suddenly realized something. "Who is it?" Deanna was confused. Cough. The moon god's soul realized that it had become the center of attention, and a trace of joy appeared in its heart. It instinctively enjoyed the feeling of being stared at by so many people and wanted to be the center of attention. However, Dake specifically told it that it had to call itself the Moon Lady in front of outsiders and not reveal its identity as the moon god. Otherwise, it would be a great obstacle to its resurrection. Since it was related to resurrection, The moon god's soul was naturally very obedient. I am the moon. At that moment, Dake's voice sounded in the arena. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon you. The moon god's soul's figure quickly faded and disappeared. Under the astonished gaze of Aurora and the others, the shadow of the moon god's soul appeared behind Dake Dimung. She opened her arms and hugged it from behind. Above her head, there was a silver mirror hanging high. A strong light erupted from the depths of the mirror, and shot out of the mirror in an instant, illuminating Dake Dimung's entire body. The silver light that was as bright as moonlight completely enveloped his body. His life form underwent a drastic change under the exposure of the silver light. It was not only the evolution of the digitized beast to a higher level, but also the transformation of a human into a digitized beast. Under the increasingly intense light, Dake Dimung's body quickly elongated and turned from a 12-year-old to an 18-year-old. His adult height was thus revealed. Silver-white armor appeared one by one around his body, and the surface of the armor flashed with light. Such a brilliant phenomenon firmly attracted the attention of everyone outside the arena. Aurora and Deanna's cute half-open mouths were not mentioned. Claire, who was on the stage, was also shocked. She, who had a deep understanding of life, could almost see Dake's transformation at a glance. That was definitely not the so-called arm transformation. Yes, she saw through the essence of Dake's arm transformation at first glance. At the same time, Yvette also saw the difference. Even the Valkyrie, who had an unparalleled understanding of arm transformation, could not help but rub the corners of her eyes at this moment. She wondered if she was hallucinating. She knew about the existence of the moon god's soul, and she also knew that Dark had used arm transformation in the dream of the magic train. She had been looking forward to seeing what kind of transformation it would be, but who could actually transform into a real one? No matter if it was the belt of the Cayman Knight series or her 12-year-old golden holy armor, to put it bluntly, they were just a layer of outer shell. If even the inner substance changed, then it would not be arm transformation but transformation spell. Speaking of transformation spell, Dake's transformation spell project had yet to be completed. Arvette took a deep breath and continued to look at the arena. Anyway, her baby son had brought her a lot of surprises. One more time would not make a difference. The one who really experienced it the most was actually Camilla, who was confronting Dake directly. Camilla could clearly feel that Dake Dimung's aura was increasing by 3 consecutive jumps. When the silver-white armor clung tightly to his body, the silver light flowing between the armor filled the gaps. His aura finally climbed to the peak. The light instantly disappeared. Dake Dimung's moon god form was displayed in front of everyone's eyes. He was tall and elegant, but not skinny. The silver-white armor clinging to his body was smooth and natural. It did not have the slightest sense of stiffness similar to armor. The V-shaped face armor structure gave him an extreme sense of sharpness. The half of his face that was exposed under the purple mask was so exquisite that people could not help but want to lift the mask and take a good look at how handsome he would be after the new year. In fact, Arvette, who was outside the arena, and Claire, who was on the stage, almost could not hold back. Deanna and Aurora both widened their eyes and could not help but watch. Aurora could not help but whisper, "So this is what he looks like after he becomes an adult?" Deanna was puzzled. "Can't you see it?" Aurora said. "Use your soul to feel it." Deanna, "Huh?" This was not the first time Dake's magic elves had seen his moon god form, but they could not help but be infatuated. That figure was as handsome as a god. As the audience, the maids could not help but be attracted and could not look away for a long time. Is this a divine armament? What a big surprise. Camilla took a deep breath. She seemed to see the shadow of the Valkyrie on Dake's body. No, the Valkyrie definitely could not have refined such a terrifying weapon at this age. She very clearly recognized that Dake had become a 6-star magic elf after dressing up. 6-star was the 3rd star of the 2nd tier. It was not considered high in the hierarchy of magic elves. Camilla even had the confidence to defeat it with her bare hands, and it would be very easy. However, her perception told her that this 6-star magic elf in front of her clearly had the strength of a peak 8-star. In fact, this was indeed the case. Moon God. This passive sure kill skill, Divine Personality Armament, gave it an exaggerated increase of 1,000 points in both magic attack and defense, causing its original 3,000 points to become 4,000 points. A super bucket waste of 4,000 points could not be found even among 8-star magic elves. Perhaps only 9-star magic elves could have such strength. How could a student who had only attended the Shangmalian Academy for 1 year be able to refine a divine armament of this level? Camilla did not dare to think about it anymore. She could not help but praise, "Too strong. You are the most talented magus I have ever seen." "You flatter me," Dake said. After the divine armament evolved into Moon God, his life form was based on the digital beast, so he could naturally speak human language. However, his voice had clearly gotten rid of the immaturity of a child, and had the masculinity of an adult male. That low and deep voice seemed to have a natural charm, making people unconsciously captivated. Camilla observed with her pure eyes and thought that Dake's posture had the charm ability. She reckoned that it also had a sure kill skill that strengthened the charm effect. She could not help but feel a trace of vigilance and tighten her grip on the Fenrir spear in her hand. This godly spear that had accompanied her on the battlefield for many years was the source of her confidence. This time it was still the same. With a spear in hand, there was a path to walk. "Make your move. Don't tell me that this posture of yours is a useless spearhead," she suddenly shouted, and the spear instantly shot out like a dragon. A cold light appeared, and Camilla moved with the spear. She could not tell if she was holding the spear or if the spear was dragging her. She only saw her and the spear turn into a silver arrow. Whoosh! The air was broken. The invisible tip of the spear attacked in the blink of an eye. Dake held the single scabbard in his hand. If he faced the enemy with his sword, his strongest attack could reach 5,800 points. That was a basic value that surpassed the 3rd tier, and was comparable to the 4th tier. Magic Elven cards that surpassed 9 stars were the 4th tier, but there was no upper limit. That represented limitless possibilities. Facing the powerful spear of the Silver Wolf Knight, Dake was not afraid at all as he thrust out his sword. Although the change in his posture was not great, his strength had been completely condensed to a single point. This sword strike fully displayed the results of the past 2 weeks of practice. Along with the increase in his basic strength, it exploded with a terrifying power. Boom! The tip of the sword met the tip of the spear. However, there was the sound of an explosion. A huge shockwave spread out in all directions, and the dust on the field was instantly raised. However, the small amount of dust did not cover the figures of the two. That level of shockwave could not shake the two of them. The second spear. The second sword. Both sides attacked forward without stopping. Silver Wolf Knight. Camilla had the ferocity and cunningness of a wolf. Her strength and skills had reached the limit of what she could achieve. Her deep research on moon magic made her a lone wolf dancing under the moon. Although she did not participate in the final battle against the Demon King, Camilla was undoubtedly a powerful warrior, who was not inferior to Mayor Montierfolly. With only a single spear, she was able to resist Dark's fierce attacks with an unstoppable momentum. Ha! Suddenly, a loud shout sounded. Camilla took a step forward, and her long silver hair moved without wind. An extremely powerful airflow burst out from the soles of her feet. Vaguely, a full moon appeared behind her head. The surface of her skin transformed into bright and pure moonlight. The light of the silver moon formed a general momentum, and the gathered light spots crazily gathered at the tip of her spear. It was extremely obvious. The transparent tip of the Fenrir spear was filled with the light of the silver moon. Dake stabbed out with his sword again, and the tip of the spear exploded with a terrifying force that was far more powerful than before. His expression changed slightly, and he immediately changed the momentum of his sword, causing the tip of the sword to slide down from the tip of the spear to the side of the spear, and then he instantly pushed it away. Clang! For a moment, Dake could feel the magic flowing away from the point of contact between the sword and the spear. However, Camilla was clearly controlling it, so that the core ability of the Fenrir spear did not go out of control. Did she go easy on me? Dake could not help but think of the battle with Deanna. Although he looked calm and was not affected by the failure, and even had the mood to comfort the defeated magic elves, However, he was not the kind of person who looked at victory and defeat so calmly. A loss was a loss. The next time he fought back, he would only say it for others to hear. If he could, he wanted to fight back immediately. Without a doubt. Camilla's invitation to battle aroused his fighting spirit. Even if he knew that the opponent was a wartime hero, she would definitely be much stronger than Deanna. He also accepted the challenge without hesitation. To be able to use magic cards, even if it was just armor and weapons, he could still display the true strength of a magister. Dake Dimming was never afraid of battle. Camilla might have planned to test the strength of his armor as an elder. But sorry, Dake had the heart to win from the beginning. First, I have to let her know that this water cannot be taken lightly. The moment he made up his mind, Dake's aura suddenly increased. It was an aura that was extremely similar to the force that Camilla released through the condensed moon wheel. However, in reality, it was completely different. Dake put away his sword and stood upright, holding the hilt with both hands in front of him. Immediately, a violent airflow rose from under his feet. It spun and rose up, forming a storm around his body. Camilla had not seen the performance of the Dilu beast and the lion beast's holy sword, so she did not know anything about the killing move of the scabbard. Although Dake did not have the talent of a hero and could not fully activate the power of the holy sword, he could still use half of the sword dance and increase the basic attack power by 50%. The killing move God Personality Armament increased the 3 sizes, and the Dilu beast's God Holy Ring were of the same nature. They were both classified as the most basic attack. Therefore, with the Moon God's current basic attack power of 4,000 points, 50% was a total of 2,000 points. Dake's feet moved slightly, and his aura continued to rise. Learning about Qi seemed to have made it easier for him to activate the sword dance. The blade of the scabbard was already surrounded by a violent airflow. The turbulent airflow was not only rising, but it was also like a small tornado. It was terrifying. Camilla felt the terror, and her expression suddenly tensed up. The Fenrir spear in her hand suddenly shook and vaguely let out the sound of a wolf's howl. Camilla took a step back and slowly raised the spear again. The battle intent in the depths of her eyes was constantly leaking out. Her warrior's intuition made her gradually realize, if this continued, she would not be able to hold it back. Her fingers were already vibrating. Dark Diamond suddenly let out a soft shout. The aura of the sword dance reached its peak. Then he did not wait for Camilla to show any other intentions. His 2 feet quickly moved forward as if he was dancing. The long sword surrounded by violent airflow seemed to be slow, but was actually very fast. It fiercely chopped towards the spear called Fenrir. And Camilla's eyes finally revealed an excitement that could not be concealed. More than 10 years of being a housewife did not let her battle intent die down. At this moment, when her battle intent was aroused, she felt that she had never retreated from the battlefield. Roar! An extremely angry wolf's howl exploded in the air. Camilla activated the 7th wheel of the Brahma acupoint. The demonic wolf force within instantly exploded. It fused with the condensed moon force of the 8th wheel of the condensed moon. The Fenrir spear in her hand had already completely manifested the shadow of a demonic wolf. The terrifying demonic wolf bit forward. 3 in 1 6000 plus, 95/233. Continue to charge. Chapter 481. Boom. Camilla's momentum crushed the entire field. The maids who lacked willpower were only affected by the demonic wolf momentum, and were crushed to the point that they couldn't breathe. However, this violent momentum couldn't affect Dake in the slightest on the spiritual level. His gaze was sharp. Under the support of sword dance, his long sword was like a storm as it slashed towards the demonic wolf that was formed by the Fenrir spear. Roar! Under the astonished gazes of many people, the huge and terrifying demonic wolf was actually destroyed by the young master of Diming's imposing sword. However, in that instant, the Fenrir spear suddenly shot out from the shattered demonic wolf and stabbed towards Dake's hand that was holding the sword. Camilla's eyes were filled with excitement. This spear made her feel a little familiar. Dake was chopping down with his sword and couldn't dodge at all. No, he didn't dodge at all. Remember the URL, Mvip can't you? VIP the longsword stirred up a storm. It was faster and faster than the spear that was stabbing towards him. Clang! The spear was instantly swung away. The strength of Dake's sword had already surpassed Camilla's current state. With only one spear, Camilla was already at a disadvantage. However, she took advantage of the situation to reduce the force. Her hand that was holding the spear only drew a small circle and fiercely whipped towards Dake's shoulder. Bang! This quick change in moves caused Dake to be unable to react in time. His left shoulder was forcefully whipped, and the silver-white armor caved in. As for him, he also slid to the right under this impact. He only managed to stop himself by stomping his foot on the ground. After Camilla recovered from her disadvantage, she didn't immediately chase after him. Instead, she pointed her spear and excitedly said, "Again!" "Come." Dake suddenly stepped forward. Although the sword dance stopped, the momentum didn't stop. The intensity of the battle between the two was completely unexpected. Deanna and Aurora, who were outside the arena, covered their small mouths at this moment. Although the two of them were born with divine strength and open 6 chakras, it was only a gift from their parents and not their own hard work. They were never arrogant because of this. He also had a clear understanding of the power that came from hard work. As a sorcerer, regardless of whether it was close combat or commanding the sorcerer fairies, he naturally had to use the sorcerer cards. Dake Diming's moon god form made people yearn for it. This was more direct and closer than his admiration for the Valkyrie Arvet. People couldn't help but wonder how good it would be if they had this kind of armament. This thought appeared in his mind. The battle had already gone on for more than 10 rounds. In the end, he was still lacking when it came to commanding his magic elf to engage in long-range combat. Only by truly participating in the battle would one be able to experience the powerful pressure at close range. Throughout history, none of the duelists who could become dueling masters didn't know how to fight. In the midst of the battle, Dark was clearly adapting to the rhythm of actual combat. He was no longer afraid of the spear tip that pierced through his eyes, and no longer stagnated for a long time because of the sudden pain. The rhythm of the battle became smoother and smoother. Roar! Another hell shook the sky. Camilla's cheeks were slightly red and her blood was boiling. "Watch carefully," she suddenly shouted and rotated the hand holding the spear. As the spear rotated, the black runes engraved on it suddenly popped out. Those runes floated in the air, layer upon layer, looking mysterious and strange. Camilla's posture changed and she shouted, "Hazy Moon's secret technique, illusory demon spear." In an instant, the condensed moon force erupted from the condensed moon wheel and gathered in the spear once again. The moonlight flowing on the spear intertwined with the magic runes, causing the spear body to become blurry for a moment. This was a unique killing move that was born from the combination of one's own force and the power of the divine armament. Dake's heart was suddenly alerted, and he immediately withdrew his sword to defend. The hand holding the sword used the moon god mirror, embedded in the middle of his body as the center, and quickly drew a circle. The moment the circle connected, the moon god mirror released bright moonlight that shone on the circle and formed a large mirror of moonlight in front of him. Camilla's spear had already arrived almost at the same time the mirror was formed. In an instant, the Fenrir spear turned into countless spear shadows that all bombarded the light mirror. Bang! The killing move, Moon God Mirror, that had the ability to completely block was actually shattered by the countless spear shadows like a storm. The fragments of the mirror flew in all directions. Dake's face appeared in the flying fragments. His eyes were filled with excitement, and the scabbard in his hand resonated with him for the first time, emitting a trace of divine aura. After the Hazy Moon secret technique, Illusory Demon Spear was completely absorbed by the Moon God Mirror. Its power was exhausted and it revealed the real spear body. Camilla looked at the silver mirror on the silver armor in surprise, and had a better understanding of Dake's divine armament. "It's my turn," Dake suddenly whispered, and the power of moonlight was released from the Moon God Mirror, and rushed towards the scabbard in his right hand. In the blink of an eye, the long sword in his hand was also condensed with the power of moonlight. Both of them were users of the power of the moon, and were very sensitive to the purity and strength of this power. After Camilla felt the threat, She quickly retreated and was 5 or 6 meters away in the blink of an eye. Dake suddenly raised his sword, and a trace of moonlight shot towards the sky from the direction of the sword. The sky suddenly lit up with brilliance. Then a clear beam of moonlight suddenly fell and shot towards Camilla. Camilla immediately pulled her spear, and the Fenrir spear that was condensed by the black spell was waved in a large circle like a light shield that was watertight. The beam of moonlight that was as thick as a water bucket bombarded the light shield, and was quickly weakened by the rotating force. However, it still penetrated and hit Camilla's body. Camilla was blasted back by the shock wave and her mind was shaken, producing a moment of dizziness. She suddenly raised her head and saw the moonlight in the sky shining brightly. Beams of moonlight quickly condensed and like a meteor shower, they fell straight down. Killing move. Demon Wolf swallows the moon. Feeling the fatal threat of the lunar eclipse, Camilla no longer held back and suddenly thrust her spear towards the sky. The demon wolf aura merged with the Fenrir spear and turned into a 5 or 6 meter tall giant demon wolf. This demon wolf was completely different from the demon wolf from before. It let out a low howl as if it had a mind of its own. Then it suddenly rushed into the sky, opening its bloody mouth towards the beam of moonlight that was falling straight down. Whoa! The wolf howl did not stop for a long time. The lunar eclipse, released by Dake, was completely swallowed by it. Boom! The power of moonlight exploded in its body and blew it into magic fragments. The scattered moonlight and magic scattered down from the sky. Dake Dimming and Silver Wolf Knight. Camilla faced each other from afar, both of them panting slightly. Up until now, the two sides had actually shown a situation of being evenly matched. Being evenly matched with a hero, who had built a great reputation during the war, should have been an extremely glorious thing. However, Dake did not feel that way. Camilla had only used a Fenrir spear weapon card from the beginning. Even if she was not proficient in armed combat, she definitely had a strong armor-type item card, but she did not use it. Other than that, she definitely had a lot of powerful trump cards. Under such circumstances, if she could not deal with it with all her might, then what was the point of fighting? Dark tapped with his finger, but he didn't use Moon God's last killing move, Moon Palace Chariot. That kind of killing move that healed indiscriminately would only have negative effects in this situation. Since the main purpose is to test the weapon, then let's try it. Therefore, after the Easter Duel Festival, Dake took out the wishful dice, once again. Seeing Dake take out a new weapon card, Camilla's expression became serious. This was the only magic card she had never seen before. She did not know what kind of surprise it would bring. However, when Dake summoned the wishful dice, she noticed that both Arvette and Claire had a strange expression. Could it be that there is something special about this weapon? Camilla immediately raised her vigilance. Her eyes were focused, and she unconsciously got into a stance. Her spear was slightly tilted, and her aura was restrained. Dake saw her vigilant look and smirked. He flicked his finger, and the white dice engraved with 18 different colored symbols instantly flew into the air. Wishful dice, follow my will, quickly show your spirit. The magic in his body flowed like a flood, and the wishful dice was like a white tiger that could not be fed, crazily absorbing his magic. The attribute symbols on the 18 sides lit up one after another. White light and black light intertwined, and the 18 colors spun and shone like colorful neon lights. The eyes of the audience were focused on the colorful lights. The maids tried their best to open their eyes wide, resisting Camilla's slightly restrained aura, and looking forward to the next performance of the young master. The battle between Dake Dimming and the Silver Wolf Knight had completely changed their guesses of his strength. In terms of swordsmanship, the young master might not be as good, but in terms of strength he did not lose at all. Thinking about it carefully, the young master, who had not even gone to school last year, was clearly a weak child, but in less than a year, he had become such a powerful person. The world was really strange. They had lived in the mansion for many years, so they had a lot of feelings. Perhaps one day, when the young master stepped onto the stage of a duel again, they could ask for leave to watch. With this thought in mind, the maids suddenly noticed that the 18-sided die had stopped spinning. Then the glowing symbols on the 18 sides extinguished one after another, leaving only the last side lit up. Although they did not understand the meaning, the maids all focused their attention. Amidst a series of exclamations, a blue glowing dragon suddenly snaked out from the die. Then, the wishful dice turned into a stream of light and followed closely behind the dragon. The blue glowing dragon made a circle in the air and then swooped down, spinning and dancing around Dake Dimmung. Dake Dimmung stood with his sword, and a dragon danced around him. A different kind of aura crazily rose. Dragon Series Dragon Dance. Dake was full of fighting spirit, as if he was possessed by a dragon. Dragon Dance. Fiercely dance a mysterious and powerful dragon dance, increasing basic attack and basic speed by 50%. The Dragon Series Dragon Dance and the normal series Sword Dance were the same type of surekill skill. However, the surekill skill of the wishful dice had not been adjusted much, and was basically the original move in Pokemon. In the original version, Sword Dance increased attack by 100%, while Dragon Dance increased attack and speed by 50%. Both had their own strengths. Moreover, it was not like the Sword Dance of the single scabbard, which only had one attack power. Before the blue glowing dragon dimmed, the increased attack and speed would still be effective. A total of 2,000 points of basic attack increased Dake's attack to 7,800 points. But the most important increase was actually his speed. A 50% increase in base speed was actually a very ridiculous change. Dake's body slightly leaned forward as he felt the light feeling on his body. In an instant, he disappeared from the spot. The scenery in his field of vision quickly receded, and the information that was transmitted to his brain became fragmented. That speed was even beyond his control. Bang! The sound of the sword colliding with the spear came from the back of his head. Dake's heart was slightly excited, and he quickly turned around. Camilla, who had used her rich battle experience to block this lightning-fast sword, had a change of expression on her face. She could not help but tighten her grip, and the black runes on the spear appeared again. She did not hesitate to turn the spear around, and a huge wave of magic that had not been shown before exploded from the Fenrir spear, and the shadow of the demon wolf was attached to the spear. When Camilla turned the spear, a pitch-black shadow was dragged out, and it was like a curtain that quickly spread out. But in the next moment Dake, who had already turned around, swung his sword a second time. Double slash! Boom! A loud sound like muffled thunder erupted in an instant. Double slash once again increased the attack by 2,000 points, causing Dake's sword to reach a terrifying strength of 9,800 points. Under the situation of only using the Fenrir spear, Camilla would not be able to block this attack no matter what. The shadow of the demon wolf wrapped around the Fenrir spear was almost crushed, and the huge amount of magic contained within was instantly destroyed. After the magic of the entire spear was exhausted, countless cracks appeared on the spear's body. With a bang, it shattered into pieces, and the remaining magic scattered like starlight. Camilla was stunned for a moment, and there was no spear in her hand to hold. She clenched her fingers, and the feeling of emptiness reminded her of the dangers during the war. When was the last time my weapon was shattered? She could not help but stand on the spot, and fell into deep thought. At this moment, the whole place was silent. After shattering the Fenrir spear, Dake slid forward for a long distance before stopping. He pointed the scabbard at the ground, and the silver armor shone, and the dancing blue light dragon around him dimmed. The recoil made his fingers feel numb, but the excitement in his heart had just begun to surface. 2 and 1 4,000 plus. Next update time, the middle of the month has passed in the blink of an eye, and the end of the month is coming. Cast your money and blades. Chapter 482. I admit defeat, I admit defeat. After a short silence, Camilla woke up from her thoughts. She turned around and looked at Dark, revealing a trace of a smile as she admitted defeat. The current her was no longer the Silver Wolf Knight, who would do anything for victory. She folded her hands in front of her, and the aura that could crush the audience had completely disappeared. All that was left was her usual gentleness. When Dake heard her admit defeat, he felt relieved, and the excitement that he had just poked his head out of the arena disappeared. My luck is not bad. He took a deep breath and did not feel proud because of this victory. In fact, Camilla was terrifyingly strong. If he had not been lucky enough to use the wishful die to get the dragon's dance, he would have had no chance of winning. 1 second to remember https://m. VIP can't you? VIP, and this was because Camilla had only used one weapon card. Camilla the Silver Wolf Knight. Not only had she mastered martial arts and magic, but she also had the necessary knowledge of magic. She was strong enough to participate in the final battle. Even if she had focused on her family for more than 10 years and did not make any progress, she was not someone that Dake could easily defeat. Of course, Dake would not belittle himself. He picked up the magic card and deactivated the armed evolution. In the next moment, he changed from his adult form to his 13-year-old appearance. Although the armed evolution is not bad, the original body is still better. Claire Kate smiled and announced the end of this impromptu overtime. Then she clapped her hands and signaled the maids who were in the audience to leave quickly. The maids were indescribably excited, looking in the direction of the young master as they left one after another. When they left, they could not help but have a heated discussion, and cheerful laughter spread throughout the Duke's mansion. Dake's final performance was soon known to everyone. In the training field, after all the maids left, Arvette came in front of Dake and could not help but hug him. Then she said, "The last 2 strikes were not bad." Dake blinked, but that was only due to luck. "Luck has always been a kind of strength," Arvette said with a smile. "Isn't it also because of luck that we were able to come this far?" Dake fell into deep thought. Camilla and Claire also came over. Claire mocked. "You didn't expect to lose, did you, Camilla?" Camilla smiled gently. "There are too many unexpected things in this world. Perhaps, Claire, you will also lose if you go up to the duel." Claire shook her finger and said confidently, "At least not now." A duel between archmages was naturally a duel using magic cards. Even if she wanted to lose, it wouldn't be that easy. But after saying that, she suddenly turned her head and said, "That's right, Dake. Where is your zoo?" Dake looked a little embarrassed. "There's one last question." Claire nodded. "If you can't solve it, you don't have to hold it in. Come to me at night." "All right," Dake said. Claire then said, "According to your learning speed, the training of chi and swordsmanship has temporarily come to an end. In July, you'll mainly focus on refining your equipment, but other magical knowledge can't be ignored." Arvette agreed. "Although the 2 equipment cards you refined are very unique, it doesn't mean that your basic knowledge is enough to pass. The fact that you don't have a mid-level equipment card is proof." Dake nodded. "That's right. Apart from Moon God equipment and wishful dice, most of the equipment I refined only has the effect of changing equipment." "It seems that your problem is more serious than I thought," Arvette said. "Then tomorrow, we'll start with the most basic knowledge. But you can't slack off on your morning training." Dake replied, "I need a normal equipment that doesn't have a time limit." Moon God Soul Eye, as God personality armament, was similar to the evolution type. It only lasted for about 15 minutes, and had a cooldown of up to an hour. Although this kind of unconventional equipment had its unique characteristics, it couldn't be used all day, which was a big drawback. You'll have to rely on your own efforts. Arvette smiled. "When you can refine a conventional equipment, I'll bring you to a place." Dake was curious. "What place?" Arvette said mysteriously, "From your performance just now, it's a place that can satisfy you." "My performance just now?" Dake thought for a moment and guessed. Could it be a place like a battle tower? After hearing this, Arvette couldn't help but open her mouth. "Can you let me keep a little mystery?" "Haha." Dake laughed dryly. "I'm just guessing. Anyway, if it's a battle tower, I'm looking forward to it." The few of them chatted as they walked out of the arena. The magical elves made way for a bench. Deanna and Aurora also moved to the side. Dake, Arvette, Claire, and Camilla sat down. They then started talking together. At the beginning, it was an overall summary of this competition. Arvette and Camilla faced all the contestants, including Deanna and Dake, and pointed out their shortcomings in the competition one by one. A duel that seemed normal to an outsider was full of mistakes in their eyes. Even the final battle between Deanna and the Diru beast was full of problems. After Arvet and Camilla spoke tirelessly, the contestants felt a sense of enlightenment when they thought about it carefully. About an hour later, they finished talking about the problems. Then Arvet said to Deanna, "How is it, Deanna? Have you thought about the reward?" Deanna pursed her lips in thought. Before coming, she didn't know that she was going to participate in the competition. Naturally, she didn't think about the reward for winning. Moreover, according to what was said at the beginning, the reward for winning should be a mystery reward that was already prepared. But in fact it wasn't. Arvet directly asked what she wanted. "What do I want?" Deanna couldn't make up her mind. She actually had a lot of things that she wanted, but if she said it out loud, she might be scolded. So, in order not to make a fool of herself, she racked her brains to think. Later on, she suddenly noticed that Camilla was winking at her. So she hesitated and said, "Can I come and play with Dake every day?" Arvet chuckled and immediately said, "Of course. How about this, do you want to learn armament forging with Dake?" Deanna blinked and asked, "Can I?" "Of course you can," Arvet said. "Treat it as your reward for winning." Deanna quickly nodded. Even she knew very well how extravagant it was to be able to receive Yvette's personal guidance. And as long as she agreed, she could come to the Duke's mansion with Camilla every morning. Camilla knew that her thoughts had been completely seen through. But it wasn't a shameful idea, so it didn't matter if it was seen through or not. Unfortunately, Arvet only agreed to teach Deanna together, but did not accept her as a disciple. After that, Arvet asked Olga to prepare a tea party for women, and the group went their separate ways. Although Deanna wanted to run over to play with Dake, she was still dragged to the tea party by Camilla. Dake, on the other hand, led the magic elves to relax for a while. That night, after Dake calmed down, he called out the system panel. A new January, a new beginning. The Great Sins index fluctuated a lot last month, but because it was randomly selected, it still remained in a relatively stable range. Pride, 92.95, Jealousy, 38.44, Rage, 80.77, Sloth, 70.68, Greed, 93.92, Gluttony, 75.78, Bliss, 82.93. First was Pride. Pride had been squeezed, and it was close to the standard value of 90 points. But because Dake deliberately relaxed, there was an increase in the second half of the month. In addition to the increase after defeating Camilla today, there was a value of 95 points. But 95 points was still not enough. Greed was similar to Pride. Bliss also rose to 93 points. Dake only paid attention to controlling the growth of Bliss, but after squeezing it dry to 90 points, it still rose by 3 points. There were too many women in the family. Some things could not be avoided just because one wanted to. In addition to the usual Pride, Greed, and Bliss, Gluttony also rose by 3 points because of Olga's feeding. What he was more concerned about was the growth of Jealousy. Some people would still feel jealous when they were obviously stronger than others. But Dake was not the kind of person who would feel jealous easily. Therefore, ever since the demon god bloodline was activated, his jealousy had not increased much. But last month, it could be said that he had a breakthrough. A total of 6 points of jealousy increased, and he had an idea of how to increase jealousy. And among the 7 great sins, the only one that had experienced a reverse increase was sloth. After returning home for the holidays, most people would become lazy. Dake was like this at first, but in less than a week he became a hard-working kitten again. The high-intensity morning exercise that started at 5 o'clock every day forcefully pulled sloth down by 2 points. In short, it's still under control. Dake knocked on his head and made a simple plan for the great sins in July. It's not realistic to just draw Pride. I have to pay attention to Greed and Bliss. When I'm familiar with the armor refining course to a certain extent, I should use Greed to refine a new magic guide spirit. But I don't have any ideas for now. I don't have any ideas for Pride's exclusive refining array either. I'm a little lost. And mathematics too. I haven't started to compile it yet. In second grade, maybe I can learn some functions or some complicated geometric problems. My head hurts. Maybe I should find some fun to relieve myself, such as completing the transformation spell? After finishing the not-so-ideal plan, Dake drew 5 points of pride before going to bed. And the reserve of pride returned to 17 points. When he woke up, it was already 5 o'clock in the morning. Dake took a deep breath, changed his clothes, and started to warm up. Then he practiced his breathing technique and swung his sword. At 7 o'clock, he went back to his bedroom, took a shower, changed his clothes, and had breakfast at 7:30. Then he had an hour of buffer time. At 8:30 he came to the classroom of armor refining. It was a well-prepared laboratory. Other than Deanna, who came with Camilla, 2 other students also came to the classroom. One of them was naturally Aurora, who had similar talents to Deanna. The other one was Meow Meow. However, Meow Meow was only a temporary observer. Meow Meow was only interested in the additional product of triad armament refining. Carving. Engraving was not a necessity for the triad armament forging. However, Dake chose this technique and was prepared to use it all the way through. As for Deanna and Aurora, they followed Arvette's instructions and chose knitting, which girls liked more. Of course, Deanna preferred to make candy figures. Aurora, on the other hand, was unexpectedly dabbling in needlework. Dake originally thought that she was the same as the noble ladies, the type who did not do any household chores. However, it seemed that was not the case. In short, Arvette's armor refining class was in full swing. The triad armament refining that Dake mastered was actually an unknown product that grafted the equipment card refining method and the triad armament refining array together. Other than luck, he was able to refine the wishful dice and the soul of the moon goddess eye completely because of special factors. Now that he had Arvette's careful guidance, he could finally learn systematically. Therefore, he was very interested. As for Deanna and Aurora, after witnessing his armament evolution with their own eyes, they were also very interested in the armament card. However, in terms of martial arts talent, they were much stronger than Dake. Once they stepped into the field that Dake was good at, they could not even touch Dake's tail. While they were still trying to cross the river, Dake had already left them in the dust. On the day that he was taught, Dake successfully refined his first proper armament card in the classroom. That was the Sour Plum Superman, that he tried to refine according to Arvette's teachings and his own understanding by using the existing materials in the classroom. When he successfully refined it, Deanna and Aurora were very curious and wanted to see him try it out. However, Dake smiled and decisively rejected them. Dake did not need it. 2 in 1 4000 plus, 97/233. The attack value in the previous chapter is wrong, has been changed, but it should not affect it. Chapter 483. The so-called Sour Plum Superman originated from a funny character in the comic Aral, also known as Silly Superman. Sour Plum Superman's Superman uniform was the same style as a certain Superman, but the S on his chest was changed to 1. He was fat, selfish, and timid, but self-righteous. He had to go to a phone booth to change into his Superman uniform. However, even if he successfully transformed into Sour Plum Superman, he still did not know anything. His ultimate skill was pretend to fly on a skateboard. Therefore, on the card, not only did it have a Superman uniform with the 1 pattern, but it also came with a skateboard. The activation incantation for Sour Plum Superman was, "Eat sour plums and become Superman." Originally, Dark had only wanted to make a simple design. He had casually carved a set of Superman's uniform as an experiment, but he did not expect to accidentally create this set of Sour Plum Superman's armor. In fact, other than being useless, there was nothing wrong with it. Let's give it to the Phoenix Girl as a toy. With that in mind, Dake put away Sour Plum Superman and continued to listen to the class. Phoenix's magical power was endless, and she was the only one among the enchanted fairies who could directly start learning magic or magical engineering. If the Phoenix Girl were to wear it, she might be able to make the Sour Plum Superman look like a superwoman. Dark was never one to make empty promises. Therefore, he really gave the Sour Plum Superman to the Phoenix Maiden after the day's lesson. Phoenix was not Dake's enchanted fairy, But Sour Plum Superman was not a high-end enchanted card with obvious personalization. Moreover, Dake did not engrave a thinking lock on this enchanted card. Therefore, the Phoenix Lady successfully summoned the Sour Plum Superman. Dake already knew that the silent sage, Cyrus, was trying to teach the enchanted fairies about magical engineering. Phoenix Maiden's learning speed was the fastest. After all, she had a unique advantage. Eat sour plums and become Superman. Phoenix chanted the activation incantation for Sour Plum Superman in an extremely cold tone as the enchanted elves watched. Then, her body glowed, and the cute princess dress turned into a fake Superman uniform in the blink of an eye. At that moment, a look of astonishment appeared on her cold face. However, that shock did not come from the appearance of Sour Plum Superman armor. In fact, even though the Superman uniform was very ugly, she still managed to make it look like a fashion show. The tight blue clothes that clung to her skin tightly wrapped around her delicate body, and the red cape paired with her fiery red hair looked like a burning flame. The red skateboard in her hand made her look even more youthful and fashionable. This Sour Plum Superman equipment was inexplicably compatible with her. What really shocked the Phoenix Lady was that after transforming into the Sour Plum Superman, her originally 1,500 mana points had been forcefully reduced to 100 attack and defense points, the same as her attack and defense. When Dark learned of this, the corner of his mouth twitched. This Sour Plum Superman can actually turn the Pretender into trash with 100 magic attack and defense. After Phoenix calmed herself, she nodded. If one looked closely, they would find that her aura had also changed. She looked even more ordinary than before. She was like an ordinary young girl, not the incarnation of a phoenix. She put the skateboard under her feet with a cold expression, obviously wanting to try it out. However, the 100 points of magic were not enough to support the enchanted elf's consumption of magic. Without Arvette's magic support, Phoenix's figure suddenly became transparent, and then completely turned into magic light spots, disappearing into the air. Dake looked at the place where she disappeared in surprise, and couldn't help but hesitate. Even her ultimate skill, Inextinguishable Tinder, has been sealed. If that was the case, this armor's ranking might be unexpectedly high. Because of the armed effect, magic or ultimate skills that could dispel abnormal statuses would most likely be useless. This was the same principle as how blessing and healing were difficult to dispel. The difference was that the armed effect could be dispelled at will. Therefore, only by completely controlling the opponent's mind could the Sour Plum Superman be used to seal the opponent's ability. It sounded stupid, but in fact, it was really stupid. If the target is the opponent, this is a magic card with a very narrow range of application. It's best to use it on an opponent who is easy to control but difficult to kill. If it's used on oneself or an ally, it can be used to hide one's aura. The disadvantage is that it will become a real waste, and it will increase the danger. Dake picked up the Sour Plum Superman, dropped by Phoenix from the ground, and in just a short while he figured out its uses and limitations. But at this time, the vampire's daughter came over, stretched out her hand and asked cutely, "Can you lend it to me to play?" Of course, Dake would not refuse. So after the vampire's daughter transformed into Sour Plum Superman, she stepped on the skateboard and played in the corridor. As for the problem of magic consumption, she had Dake's daddy, right? Woohoo, take off. The vampire's daughter's laughter echoed, as pleasant as a silver bell. Dake shook his head slightly, showing a helpless smile. Then he recorded the results of this experiment, and then took out the information related to Zoo, and continued to study it. It was the same as his answer to Claire. In the study of Zoo, he was indeed left with one last problem. But to be left with the last problem, it was naturally the most difficult and complicated one. He had been troubled by this for a long time. But he did not plan to visit Claire late at night, and still tried to rely on his own ability to solve the problem. The next day, Arvette's weapon forging workshop was opened again. But the students in the classroom changed from 4 to 3. Meow Meow only listened to Arvette's complete explanation of triad armament forging on the first day, and then returned to its own classroom. It did not even have the most basic knowledge of magic, And of course it was impossible to learn triad armament forging. The first day of listening was just to be able to carve better. This may be the self-cultivation of a good assistant. Then our topic today is to forge the most basic weapon. Armor. Our vet knocked on the blackboard, reminding Dake to pay attention. Dake, who had completely mastered the standard forging method of triad armament forging on the first day, was distracted thinking about what to forge today, and did not expect our vet to set the topic directly. He quickly came back to his senses and listened carefully. Even though there were 3 students in the class, our vet was actually only talking to him, because the other 2 had not even started. The difficulty of mastering triad armament forging was even more difficult than the difficulty of forging fusion magic cards. Of course, it was not something that could be learned overnight. Deanna and Aurora, who had only listened to the class for 1 day, could only take notes first, and then gradually digest it. Our vet's free time was actually very limited, and it was impossible for her to teach them step by step. Lecture in the morning. Experiment in the afternoon. Our vet left quickly after the class. Dake brought Deanna and Aurora to do the experiment together. As the name implied, Armor was an armament card that looked like armor after wearing it. The armament that Mike Owen had used before was a type of armor. Refining this kind of armed card required a great deal of effort to carve. Our vet generally used a knitted skirt, and Dake needed to carve a complete set of armor first, preferably a full-body armor that included headwear and weapons, because it was an experiment that used all the basic materials. So Dake was not overly meticulous when he was carving, and he chose to pursue speed. He chose a piece of silver from the materials, and then quickly carved a full-body armor. The weapon he chose was a long spear. Our vet's immortal spear and Camilla's Fenrir spear had some influence on him. After the carving was completed, he began to forge. The standard forging method of triad armament forging was very different from the general forging method of the equipment card. However, the standard forging method of triad armament forging still required the Manjasaka potion to be used as the base. This was probably one of the main reasons why Dake was able to successfully forge his armament forging in the academy. Because he had already done the experiment yesterday and had a finished product, Dake's experimental technique was obviously faster and more stable today. After about half an hour, he had completed all the prerequisites of triad armament forging. Deanna had been lying on the table and observing. At this moment, she asked curiously, "Can we start carving the triad armament forging formation now?" "That's right." Dake nodded. Then, he used the magic pen to carve a 3-dimensional complex forging formation on top of the blank magic card. It was only this step that he was exceptionally proficient in. After the carving was done, he needed to pour in the spiritual power to transform the triad armament forging formation into the spiritual furnace. The stimulation and use of the spiritual power was one of the core teachings of our vet. Before this, Dake had been opportunistically using the Great Sin to replace the spiritual power. However, that was obviously not the way to sustainable development. What Yalvet taught him was a special technique called the 3 flowers technique. The so-called 3 flowers technique was the technique of the 3 flowers of essence, chi, and spirit at the acupoint. This was originally a technique used by martial arts powerhouses to open the Brahma acupoint wheel. However, after our vet made some slight changes, it became a technique that could trigger the spiritual power. The foundation of the 3 flowers technique was the chi. With the chi as a bridge, one could connect the essence and spirit of the human body, combine them, and gather them on the Brahma acupoint wheel above the head. Once the Brahma acupoint wheel was opened, the force could be generated. The essence of the force was the spiritual power. This was the reason why our vet had originally planned to wait until Dake had a preliminary grasp of the chi before teaching him the standard forging method of the triad armament forging. With the chi, even if he could not open all 7 acupoints to generate the force, he could still use the adjusted 3 flowers technique to stimulate the spiritual power. Only with the spiritual power could he cast the spiritual furnace. After Dake finished inscribing the triad armament forging formation, he pointed between his eyebrows and closed his eyes to concentrate. His practice of the underworld spirit technique allowed him to master the three flowers technique faster than the gifted Deanna and Aurora. When his essence, chi, and spirit were highly concentrated, it was as if he could hear a drop of water dripping into his heart, creating ripples in his heart that spread outwards. His fingertip gradually lit up with a white light, and a trace of spiritual power was emitted. Then he suddenly opened his eyes, and a bright light flashed in his eyes. With a stroke of his finger, the white light at his fingertip immediately pointed at the glowing sphere of the Triad Armament Forging Formation. The white light was like ink spilled from above, and in the blink of an eye, it dyed the entire surface of the forging formation white. The process of spiritual watering went very smoothly. Dake let out a sigh of relief, and then he revealed a smile. When casting the three flowers technique, he could inject his thoughts into it and change the environment of the spiritual furnace, refining the armament that he desired. Of course, that was an extremely high-end application. He couldn't do it well now. However, this didn't stop him from trying. Armament is still the same, right? Dake then placed the carved silver statue into the spiritual furnace and took the opportunity to eat a candy. In a split second, the spiritual furnace released a huge suction force that greedily devoured his magic power. When 2/3 of his magic power was gone, the entire forging process was finally completed. Finally, he picked up the magic pen and pressed lightly on the top of the spiritual furnace, and the spherical forging formation was pushed into the magic card, leaving only a thick layer of light. The reaction in the magic card was still intense. Dake observed carefully and waited patiently. It wasn't until 5.5 minutes later that the violent fluctuations in the magic card gradually subsided, and the layer of light on the card surface gradually thinned and sank into the card. A silver-white armor slowly appeared on the surface of the card. Although it was very different from what he had in mind, it was indeed a set of metal armor that was equipped with a silver spear. Of course, if Dake really wanted to forge that, he wouldn't have added a weapon out of thin air. Moreover, the materials used for carving and the auxiliary materials needed to be added during the forging process were all very particular. With the current materials in the classroom, it was not quite possible. Deanna and Aurora came over and stared at the magic card. Looks like it's a success? Dake stood the magic card upright and injected magic power into it. After a while, a trace of information was sent back. Card name, Spear Armament. Type, Item Card. Effect, Attack plus 200, Defense plus 100, Ultimate Skill, Spear of God, Spear of God. The silver spear of Spear Armament is extremely malleable. It can instantly lengthen and shoot the enemy. Armor penetration plus 1, Attack plus 200. How is it? Deanna asked excitedly. Dake frowned slightly. Surprisingly, it's a decent weapon. Let's try it on, Deanna immediately suggested. All right. Dake nodded. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon Spear Armament. Armor transform. Dake used his fingers as a sword and waved it gently. The spear armament between his two fingers shone brightly. Countless silver threads burst out from the surface of the card, wrapping around his body in an instant, and weaving into a silver-grade equipment at an extremely fast speed. Dake reached out his hand, and the silver threads that emerged from the armor spiraled down, and formed a silver spear. Looking at himself in the mirror, the armor almost covered his entire body. Only his head and half of his face were exposed. From the moment he started to equip himself, the spear armament began to continuously absorb his magic power. The magic power flowed through the armor, and made the connection between the armor and his body even closer. Dake felt it slightly and realized that although his current state was not as good as when the armor evolved into the moon god, it still brought about a certain degree of improvement to his vitality. I'm afraid this is the difference between the armor card and the equipment card. The equipment card's additional attack and defense are located on the equipment, while the armor card improves the overall quality of the user. For example, when you equip a normal armor, you will only feel heavy. After the armor transformation, you will feel lighter. However, the price you have to pay is the constant consumption of magic power. Dake sensed it carefully. The current spear armament consumed 3 points of magic power per second, which was equivalent to the consumption of a 3-star magic elf. However, this was only the beginning. As he continued to use the armor card, the consumption of magic power would increase. Shoot Spear of God. Dake suddenly pointed at the dummy in the corner. The silver spear in his hand instantly extended and pierced through the dummy's chest. This sudden scene made Deanna's mouth open into an O shape. Dake shook the body of the spear again, and the silver spear suddenly retracted. The body of the spear trembled slightly. Then he tried the Spear of God, every second. After 15 seconds, the body of the spear extended again, and pierced through the dummy's abdomen. The cooldown is only 15 seconds? So fast. Dake withdrew the spear and could not help but feel a little regretful. If he had been more careful in the carving and the selection of materials, maybe he would not have created this spear armament. A man who is never content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Be content, be content. Dake repeatedly reminded himself. However, the greed +1 still floated in front of his eyes. He was delighted and then shared his thoughts and experience with Deanna and Aurora during the experiment. Deanna held the notebook and could not help but say enviously, "I also want to see how it works." "Master the 3 flowers technique first," Aurora reminded. Deanna took a deep breath and sighed. Dake and the other two's classes were more free. After the experiment in the afternoon, they could basically be dismissed. However, Dake did not leave. Instead, he stayed and replaced Yvette to give Deanna and Aurora a tuition. Because they were eager to be like Dake and freely create the clothes they liked, the two of them were very serious during the tuition. Unfortunately, Deanna's brain was full of paste. Before this, Aurora had very little exposure to magical engineering. It could be said that she was starting from scratch. Therefore, her learning progress was very slow. Moreover, Deanna could not stay in the Duke's mansion until night time. When Camilla's teaching task was completed, she had to go home with her mother and come back the next day. Dake sent Deanna to the door every time, then turned back to check on the daily learning of the magical elves. After that, he had dinner with his family and finally returned to the bedroom to continue studying Zoo. He was only one step away from completing his research on Zoo. Dake temporarily put aside other topics and focused on solving the difficult problem of Zoo. However, as the research deepened, the final difficult problem was analyzed layer by layer. He gradually noticed that there was knowledge that was beyond the scope of his syllabus. It was already beyond the scope of his ability to solve. Hiss! Dake knocked on his head and was a little worried. The drawbacks of starting to research such a profound card like the Zoo when he was only in his first year were finally revealed. He was stuck. Then there was a problem. What should he do if he was stuck? Answer 1, pay for it. Answer 2, call someone. Dake thought about it and chose to call someone. However, it was late at night and he did not want to disturb them. Dake decided to visit Claire again tomorrow night. July 4th, Wednesday. The sun hung high in the sky and the heat was unbearable. Dake handed in the results of yesterday's experiment in Yvette's combat weapon refining class. After inspecting the gun armament, Yvette gave a certain affirmation. It seems that refining the armor armament is not difficult for you. It's a pity that this gun armament is not enough for you to step into the Tower of Ares. The Tower of Ares? Is that the battle tower that was mentioned before? Dake asked curiously. Yvette smiled and nodded. The Tower of Ares, also known as the Tower of the God of War, is a sacred place for combat weapon duels. Your sister Ollie once entered the tower to train. Dake looked up thoughtfully and said, "What's the difference between combat weapon duels and magic duels?" Yvette said, "Combat weapon duels, as the name suggests, are mainly duels with combat card. Duelists can only use combat card and equipment card. Moreover, there is no magic ball, only an arena, and the duelist has to fight in person." Dake was puzzled. "I summon my fist as an attack?" Yvette could not help but laugh. That's not wrong. In short, combat weapon duels have less variety compared to magic duels, but they are more intense and lean more towards actual combat. Dake nodded. "Then why do you say that my gun armament is not enough to enter the Tower of Ares? Is there a threshold to enter the Tower of Ares?" "Of course there is. Yvette smiled. For most people, it's very difficult to even obtain the qualifications to enter the Tower of Aries. It's useless to talk about it now. You'll know when the time comes. Dake asked, when is the time? Yvette said slyly. That's not necessarily true. It'll have to wait until I'm done with my matters. It'll be at least August. Does it take that long? Dake could not help but ask. Yvette said, there's no other way. The Holy Church is restless. Dake's pupils constricted, and he did not continue on this topic. After all, they were in class, and this was the end of the digression. After Yvette stopped, she wrote on the blackboard. Today, we'll start a new topic, the advanced chapter of armor armament. Drive armament. Then she explained the topic based on the knowledge. Although she did not cite the classics, she was clear and detailed. Dake gradually understood what drive armament was. The biggest difference between armor armament and armor armament was that it did not exist directly in the form of armor or weapon. Instead, it gathered all the information into an exclusive drive. Through the drive, it completed the armor transformation. This drive could be a belt, a wand, a shape-shifting device, a rock, or a sword. In short, there were many types of drives, but the core element was the same, which was to assist its owner in the armor transformation. So, what's the advantage of drive armament? Dark still had some understanding of something like a drive, but what he didn't understand was what was the point of adding an additional drive between the magic card and the armor in this world where the original use of the magic card was to be driven. Yvette blinked and said, for most of the mages who specialize in armor cards, the biggest advantage of drive armament is that they don't need to design the armor armament itself. They only need to design a drive, and then let the armor armament refine freely. This will make the design process more convenient, and the refined armor armament will be more reasonable. A benefit for the handicapped? Dake could not help but ask. Yvette said, probably. Dake asked again, what about a small number of mages? Yvette said, everyone has their own understanding. I'm more willing to call it spirit armament. For our school, the essence of drive armament is to omit the steps of making the armor armament itself and focus on the process of spirit watering. It's not that we don't really design it, because you have to know what you want to refine. Dake shook his head and said, designing a specific model in the brain is not as easy as refining an armor armament. Yvette said, that's true, but in this way, the requirements for the materials will be relatively lower. Moreover, drive armament is often more suitable than armor armament and more suitable for mages. Most importantly, drive armament can increase the power of the mind. Idealistic armament. Dake could not help but be silent. If that was the case, drive armament indeed had greater potential than armor armament. Of course, there were armors that could also increase the power of the mind, but they were extremely rare. At this point, Dake had a rough understanding of drive armament. Yvette saw this and said, as usual, I'll explain the essentials of drive armament in the morning. The afternoon will be left for you to experiment on. Dake nodded slightly. Yvette began to teach. The steps of drive armament seemed to be simplified, but it was more complicated than armor armament in essence. Dake absorbed the knowledge taught by Yvette with all his might like a sponge. Although Deanna and Aurora did not understand much, they still took notes seriously. With full concentration, the morning class ended quickly. Yvette did not even have lunch in the Duke's mansion and rushed to the office with Claire. As the middle of July approached, they became busier. Other than occasionally discussing with them, Dake was still speculating about the current situation through the newspapers. He could faintly feel that the undercurrents were surging in the King's City, and all kinds of monsters were peeking their heads out. When the saint held the execution ceremony, it would be the time for all kinds of monsters to dance. However, Dake would occasionally think that if he could think of this, the saint would definitely think of it. Could it be that the saint was actually on the 5th level? Did the execution ceremony have another purpose? That afternoon, after Dake entered the classroom, he began to try to craft drive armament. However, the crafting of drive armament was indeed more difficult than armor armament. Dake tried a few times and ended in failure. He was lucky enough to succeed in the last attempt, but it was better than nothing. This made him worried. However, after announcing that the class was over, he quickly regained his composure. After dinner, at 9:30, after Dake learned from Olga that Claire had returned for less than half an hour, he brought the relevant materials and books to visit her. This was the first time Dake visited Claire Kate's room at night after returning to the Duke's mansion. "You're here?" Claire, who was only wearing pajamas, leaned against the white hollow chair with a slightly tired expression. During this period of time, she was assisting Yvette in handling official business. She was also extremely busy and only had free time at night. After Dake stepped into Claire's bedroom, he noticed that there was a zoo in the bedroom. However, the familiar animals were all quietly nesting in various parts of the room. Even the most mischievous monkeys only hung themselves on the swings hanging from the ceiling and swayed slightly. "Aunt Claire, are you okay?" Dake asked. Claire waved her hand. "Of course." Thus, Dake did not hesitate and directly moved the densely written notebook in front of her to communicate with her in depth. After more than an hour, Dake was enlightened. Originally, he relied on his own ability to research for a very long time, and was only one step away. Now, with Claire's guidance, he finally understood the last part of the syllabus thoroughly. "Looks like I can start refining the zoo in 2 days." Dake was excited and his eyes were full of vigor. Unlike the paradise that he got for free, the zoo was basically researched by him bit by bit. The time and energy spent on it was immeasurable. If he could successfully refine it, it would be a great affirmation of his own efforts. It could be said to be a stage victory for his learning career. However, before that, he still had to solve a small problem. "Here, material bag." Claire waved her hand, and a monkey walked over with a big box in its arms. 3 sets. It's gone after it's used up." She pointed at the box and said. Dake immediately picked up the box. It was a yo-yo. Claire shook her head and picked up Galileo from the table and walked to the bed. 4 in 1 8000 plus, 99/233. Moving today used up all the physical strength that I accumulated over the past 18 years. Now, I'm in an unprecedented state of exhaustion. I closed my eyes several times when I was writing because I was too tired, but I finally finished today's update. I'll sleep and continue moving. Smiley face iota angle, _ Chapter 484. Come and eat. Not long after, Dake returned to the bedroom with a box full of materials. After he took out the 3 sets of materials, he sorted them out and put them away. Most of the materials for zoo were common, but 2 of them were not the core materials, but they were necessary and very rare. Those 2 materials were difficult to buy even in the Shungmalian Academy, let alone outside of the academy. Dake did not go out to do market research, so he could only speculate. But from Claire's tone, it should not be wrong. Maybe after all 3 sets of materials were used up, there would be no more. It was late that night, and although Dake was itching, he did not immediately start the experiment. He remembered the website, MVIP VIP. After a good night's sleep, he continued with his classes the next day. As usual, Arvette arrived at the small classroom of the Armed Forces workshop at 8:30. Dake, Deanna, and Aurora also came early. Yvette said as soon as she started, "We only have 1 hour today, so if you have anything you don't understand, ask me as soon as possible. I will be going out often in the next few days, so our classes will end here for the time being." Dake was prepared for this, so he was not surprised. Aurora didn't really understand, so she wasn't particularly concerned. Only Deanna could not help but be surprised, and looked around as if she had seen a ghost. Yvette smiled and said meaningfully, "Although the classes are temporarily stopped, you can still come here to review the knowledge you have learned before, or to do experiments. I will ask Molly to fill up the storage of materials in this laboratory." Deanna blinked and said happily, "That means we can continue with our classes?" Yvette nodded. "When the time comes, you can ask Dake if you don't understand anything, or ask him to collect the questions and give them to me when I return to the mansion." Deanna immediately put her hands on the table and sat upright. These few days of summer tutoring had made her fall in love with classes. If this summer tutoring ended like this, Not only would she lose her legitimate reason to come to the Duke's mansion, but she would also be forced to practice her sword and spear every day. But what kind of girl liked to play with swords and guns? Even if Deanna liked it in the past, she now had the preferences of a normal girl. Wouldn't it be better to make clothes and forge equipment with his little cousin in this classroom? Although there were only failures and no successes for the time being, when the technique was practiced to a certain extent, perhaps it could break through the theoretical barrier? Moreover, she had more or less grasped the beginnings of the three flowers technique. Perhaps she would be able to learn it in a few days. At that time, even if he didn't refine the armed card, he could at least refine a few outfit card, right? After he mastered the refining method of the outfit card, he would make a few sets of sister edition and couple edition, Diana thought happily. She then saw Dark walking back and forth between the stage and the audience, asking questions as many as the hairs on a cow. She didn't have any questions to ask, so she just sat there like a fool. An hour passed quickly. Dake put down his notebook regretfully, and then sent Arvette out of the mansion. After this, both Arvette and Claire would be very busy, and he had to start speeding up his progress. After Arvette left, it was the second class in the morning. Dake continued with the refining experiment of the driving armament. Although it still ended in failure, he compared it with the notes and finally figured out some of the problems. He had a feeling of suddenly being enlightened. When he came back to his senses, it was already lunchtime without him noticing. Magical refining experiments always gave him a sense of immersion. The joy of creating things was much better than building blocks and building Gundams. Therefore, after lunch, he immediately returned to the classroom and continued with the experiment. But this time, the subject of the experiment had changed. It was time to try to refine the zoo. Although there were only 3 sets of materials, one set of materials could not be used up every time he failed. Therefore, the error tolerance of this experiment was not as low as it seemed. After Dake explained it to Deanna and Aurora, he began his first attempt. The zoo was a field card. The field card had a higher requirement for the true projection technology than the equipment card. Therefore, the quality of the Manjasaka magic potion was also more demanding. The quality of the magic potion that Dake used to refine the armament was actually not up to standard. Therefore, he first had to make a breakthrough in the quality of the Manjasaka magic potion. This was also one of the problems that he had been unable to solve before. However, under Claire's late-night teaching, he already had a clue. The Manjasaka was a bright red color. According to legends, it was a flower of the other shore that bloomed in the underworld. The dead wandered in the void of the underworld, and would occasionally encounter the red color. Once it was attracted, the Manjasaka would transform into the most desired, most reluctant, and most untouchable thing in their hearts. It would make them feel as if they were in a dream, befuddled, and unknowingly nibbled away until there was nothing left. The reason why the Manjasaka magic potion was named this way was because it also had the effect of transformation. However, in the previous method of making the magic potion, he did not actually add any Manjasaka. It was named Manjasaka, but there was no Manjasaka in it. Therefore, if he wanted to make a breakthrough in the quality of the magic potion, he had to make an issue out of the Manjasaka's substitute. The previous refinement used a variety of ingredients to achieve the transformation effect. This time, he was prepared to make a magic potion called Magic Hallucination Potion. Then he would use this magic potion as a foundation to further refine Manjasaka. As the name suggested, Magic Hallucination Potion was a magic potion that could cause people to hallucinate. Just the experiment of improving the Manjasaka magic potion alone took 3 whole hours. However, when the experiment results were out, Dake could not help but smile. He felt a sense of comfort from the bottom of his heart. Can I dream of what I want after consuming this? Deanna leaned over and sniffed. Dake hurriedly moved the tube of finished potion away and reminded her. Manjasaka is highly addictive. It's the most forbidden of forbidden drugs. Don't touch it at all, understand? Deanna smacked her lips. Woman's fine. Deanna is very obedient. Dake raised his hand and pinched Deanna's soft little face. He smiled and said, It's good that you're obedient. Once I've refined Zoo, I'll bring you to a good place to play. What good place? Is there good food? Deanna's eyes lit up. Dake smiled. There should be everything. After that, he continued to prepare for the zoo refinement. Other than the equipment card, as true projection element, Zoo also had the magic card, spell element. In other words, he needed to use the spellcraft language to write his own Zoo spell. The more he studied, the more shocked Dake was that Claire could develop a field card like Zoo. Not only did Claire develop Zoo, but she also developed the higher level, Animal Kingdom, and Paradise. Dake had a deep understanding of the power and usefulness of Paradise. His future goal was to study Zoo and the higher level Animal Kingdom, to develop his own field cards. The height of a field card spell was different from that of a magic card spell. However, the width of a field card spell was usually higher than that of a magic card spell. Therefore, its spell was not necessarily very profound, but it would definitely be very long. When Dake first tried to write it, he found that the length of Zoo's spell was almost 6 times that of Fusion. After that, he gradually improved it and doubled it, making Zoo's spell 12 times longer than that of Fusion. After talking with Claire last night and solving the last problem, Zoo's spell was 13 times longer than that of Fusion. Due to his limited knowledge, he did not fully understand the theory of Zoo's spell. Instead, he used a formula to write it. Therefore, he still needed to do a detailed test to see if the spell he wrote could really be used. After that, he would need to make some minor adjustments according to the various indicators and finally come up with a spell that was perfectly compatible with him. Claire had already taught him the detailed test method, but it was also very cumbersome. He maintained enough patience and spent a full 3 hours to complete the adjustment of the spell. At this time, it was already dusk. Deanna was reluctantly pulled home by Camilla. Aurora also left the classroom to do her own things. Dake looked at the little magical beast that stuck its head out at the door and waved his hand. The little magical beast immediately flew to the side of the experiment table and sat down curiously to look at the bottles and jars on the table. Dake was preparing for the formal experiment while casually asking, "How's the learning progress?" The little demonic beast immediately poured out the beans with a blah 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 sound. The learning progress of the magic elves was much faster than Dake expected. The most intelligent and hardworking magic elves had already completely grasped the basic knowledge. The representative of this group of magic guiding fairies was its little fiend magical beast. In short, the little magical beast tilted its head and said these words. Apart from it, the Diru beast, fairy Evie and the magician secretary were also in the first echelon. The second echelon, which was slightly behind in learning, was Meow Meow, lion beast, milk can and kettle kettle. The third echelon was the shapeshifter, Hawkman and Chio Sea lion. The remaining vampire's daughter, Phoenix girl, dream demon, moon god soul, cyanide dragon, and sword sheath were in the fourth echelon. Trash slime was the only one. The vampire's daughter and Phoenix girl, who originally needed to grasp the basic knowledge, did not have good grades. The former was always absent-minded, while the latter was born not long ago, and was also influenced by the environment. However, with Madam Cook's strict discipline, they could not overturn the heavens. Dake praised the little magical beast's efforts as he said, "When the middle of the month comes, let the teachers organize a stage test." Little magical beast, "Ah!" Dake said lightly, "When the time comes, I will give different amounts of little red flowers as rewards according to your ranking. Since you are in the first echelon, do your best to fight for it." The little magical beast suddenly quivered and stood up. "I'll go back first." Then it spread its wings and ran away in a hurry. Dake couldn't help but smile as he walked over and locked the classroom door from the inside. Then he began the official refining experiment. The first experiment went on for 6 minutes, and without any suspense, it failed. Dake was not discouraged and continued. The second experiment went all the way to the writing of magic incantations, but because of a mistake in the writing of a magic incantation, all the previous efforts were wasted. Dake couldn't help but take a deep breath as he remembered the painful experience of repeatedly copying in order to submit a flawless composition. This actually tested one's mentality more than the mistakes in other steps. After he noticed that there was a problem with his mentality, he stopped to sort out the magic incantation once, and then continued again. He didn't succeed all the way until dinner time. Tonight, Yvette and Claire didn't come back for dinner. Dake brought Aurora and the magic elves to the table to eat while observing their progress and relaxing at the same time. The many failures had reduced the amount of materials in his hands by a whole set. The remaining amount was just enough to refine 2 zoo cards. If he could successfully refine 1 zoo card, then there was only 1 set left to try and make mistakes. Dinner time was just the right time for him to reflect on his actions. In the end, he decided to stop the experiment and spend the night to summarize the failures of the day before studying again. This way, when he continued the experiment the next day, it was indeed much smoother. Dark actually completed all the steps in one go, refining a finished product of the magic card. He removed the stains on the surface of the magic card and saw the open-ended zoo pattern on the card. There were shadows of animals in the zoo pattern on the pattern. Dake was delighted and immediately picked up the tweezers to pick up the magic card. But when he picked up the card halfway, the surface of the card suddenly emitted an extremely chaotic light. He was shocked and immediately put down the tweezers and the magic card. The 3 chakras in his body were operating at high speed, releasing chi all over his body. Then he quickly retreated. Then he saw 2 people in front of him and the experiment table. Then, from the magic card, there were distorted buildings that crazily drilled out. Those buildings seemed to be forcibly squeezed out from a narrow place and quickly expanded. At the same time as the experiment tools were sent flying, they suddenly rushed in all directions. Deanna and Aurora punched at the same time. The surging chi, together with their innate strength, smashed the surging buildings into smithereens in an instant. They dispersed before they could form. Magic power exploded like fireworks. The classroom returned to silence. 2 and 1 4,000 plus yesterday. Today is a busy day but a little more free than the previous 2 days. Yesterday morning, I only slept for 3 hours before I was woken up. As a result, my whole body hurt yesterday and I couldn't take it. Try to update at 12 o'clock today. Chapter 485. There's only 1 last set of materials left. Dake took a deep breath and began to tidy up the broken experimental tools. The head maid, Molly, heard his voice and knocked on the door of the classroom. Dake called her in and ordered, "Change the experimental equipment." Then he spread out a pen and paper in the corner of the classroom and did a complete review of the experiment process, trying to figure out the main reason for the failure. When he was refining fusion, he also made a lot of mistakes, but because Senior Panduola was by his side, every mistake was quickly discovered and pointed out. This time, there was no one watching him, so he could only rely on himself to find the mistakes. But he had to admit that it was very difficult. It was even more difficult than Mathematical Olympiad. But before he found the root of the problem, he couldn't do it. Because there was only 1 set of materials left. Remember, https://m, vipcanchu, VIP. Molly quickly changed the experimental equipment, but Dake didn't succeed in finding the mistakes. Deanna and Aurora saw this and quietly left the classroom. The 2 sisters changed to another living room and sat for a while. Then Aurora said to Deanna, "Sister, do you want to sit in my room?" Deanna's eyes lit up, and she immediately said, "Sure." She didn't have a sister who could do small handicrafts with her in the courtyard of the Great Bell family. Some time ago, she went to Viscount Flotty's house to look for Luosi to play, but she found that Luosi was in a difficult situation where she couldn't wait to use every second. She didn't have time to play with her. Viscount Flotty seemed to want to compensate her for neglecting her all these years. She found 6 tutors for her, and it was said that one of them was a senior who had just graduated from the Shungmalian Academy. In short, those tutors worked 24 hours a day, from aristocratic etiquette to violin playing, from basic knowledge to magical theory, from tea ceremony to clothes. They arranged everything for Luosi. Now that she had a little cousin, she could fill the void of Luosi. Therefore, Deanna entered Aurora's room happily. Aurora's room was very neat and tidy. Perhaps it was because she rarely went out to buy things after living here, but it was even a little monotonous. However, from the details, one could still see traces of a young girl's heart. Deanna looked around furtively and suddenly noticed a small crib. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "Why is there a crib here?" Aurora walked to the side of the crib and lifted the cloth covering it slightly. She said, "I heard from my mother that I have already lived in the Duke's mansion for a period of time. This is the crib I slept in at that time." "Oh, is that so?" Deanna walked around the crib twice and suddenly wondered, "Why don't I remember sleeping in a crib like this?" Aurora was stunned for a moment before she said, "Maybe he doesn't remember." "That's true." Deanna nodded. Aurora asked her to sit on the sofa for a while. Then she took out a box of crystal honey cakes and a set of tea sets. She made some lemon tea and placed some snacks on the table. Then, she sat down and started to chat with Deanna about girls' topics. After a few days of studying together, the two of them had become much closer to each other. Deanna was very interested in the City of Freedom where Aurora lived. Aurora, on the other hand, wanted to know about the living situation in the Shungmalian Academy in advance. After a while, they became more familiar with each other. While the two girls were chatting happily, Dake Dimming was still thinking hard. In order to not interrupt his train of thought, he even gave up on lunch. It was only after 3 o'clock in the afternoon that he found some clues. Then, using this clue as a starting point, after another hour of deconstruction and deliberation, he finally found the mistakes of the previous experiment. Then, he grabbed the pastries that Olga brought and ate 2 bites. Then, without stopping, he started the last experiment of refining. Under normal circumstances, he would have rested well before starting the refining process. After spending so much time and finally finding the problem, he was so excited that he couldn't control himself for a while. So he decided to strike while the iron was hot and started right away. However, he didn't make any mistakes because of this. Everything was so stable that it was scary. After about 2 hours, the spell floating on the magic card suddenly condensed. On the surface of the magic card, a zoo composition that was almost the same as the previous one gradually appeared. In each area of the zoo, there were all kinds of shadows of birds and beasts. "Finally, it's done?" Dake took a deep breath and picked up the tweezers. Based on the previous failure, he didn't simply think that the refining of the magic card would be considered a success at this point. Before the successful summoning, every magic card could be a failure. Just like before the ignition, every firecracker could be a dud. Dark cautiously used a pair of tweezers to pick up the magic card. After hanging it for a moment, he discovered that this magic card didn't suddenly glow like the previous one. He let out a sigh of relief and took it to the tap to wash it. As the dirt on the magic card was washed away, the surface of the magic card became clearer. Dake had seen Claire's zoo before, but the surface of the 2 cards was obviously different. To be specific, the style of the zoo was different. However, this wasn't strange. Even if it was a magic card with the same name, there would be subtle differences. In this world, there was no such thing as a magic card that was exactly the same. Dake put the washed magic card back on the table. Then he picked up the magic pen and touched the surface of the card, slowly injecting a trace of magic power. The magic power flowed into the card very smoothly. Dake was finally sure that this magic card wouldn't suddenly explode. So he gradually smiled and personally injected magic power to obtain information. Card name, Zoo Type Venue Card. Effect 1. Summoning time of the bird or beast type magic fairy that belongs to you -1s. Effect 2. Summoning a bird or beast type magic fairy that belongs to you in the zoo. Magic power +200. Attack +200. Defense +200. Effect 3. Summoning a bird or beast type magic fairy that belongs to you in the zoo. Each magic fairy's magic power recovery speed will increase by 1 point/second, up to a maximum of 10 points/second. Effect 4. Additional ultimate skill 10,000 beasts out of the cage. A large amount of information flowed into Dake's mind through the feedback of the magic power, and he couldn't help but look surprised. So this zoo venue card has 4 effects? The venue effect is basically limited to the summoning time of the bird or beast type magic fairy that belongs to you. Apart from the basic 1-second reduction in summoning time, There are also 3 attributes increase that this type of venue card generally has. However, compared to Paradise S effect, Zoo's 3 attributes increase can't be stacked and is fixed at 200 points. Effect 3 should be the reason why the magic fairies can survive in the zoo venue for a long time. The mechanism of this effect should be the same as Paradise, which is to form an energy cycle through the circuit between the venue and multiple magic fairies, giving the magic fairies additional magic power recovery ability. The difference is that Paradise has 10 magic fairies in it at the beginning, so no matter how many are summoned, the magic power recovery speed will be 10 points/second. If Paradise is upgraded to 2.0, the magic power recovery speed will increase even further. What's more surprising is the effect 4. Claire didn't mention that the zoo venue actually has a ultimate skill. Dake thought about it carefully for a moment before he injected more magic power to check the effect of the ultimate skill. 10,000 beasts out of the cage. 10,000 beasts out of the cage. Magic fairies that come out of the zoo together, the bird or beast type magic fairy that belongs to you, will receive a group attack power increase for 30 seconds. When the number reaches 10, attack power increases by 200. When the number reaches 100, attack power increases by 2,000. This effect, Dake couldn't help but frown. For a normal mage, even if they were proficient in bird or beast type magic, it would be difficult to summon 100 bird or beast type magic fairies in a battle, unless they use some special method to summon a group of them. Or they could use effects like Great Liberation to separate individuals into groups. Apart from the limitation of numbers, the group attack power increase for 30 seconds was still very impressive. In particular, the 2,000 attack power increase of 100 beasts was really shocking. The real effect of Zoo was much stronger than he had expected. Using this as a basis, it was easy to imagine what kind of venue card Animal Kingdom would be. Perhaps it could really summon 10,000 beasts out of the cage. Sage of the Beasts was really terrifyingly strong in a sense. Finally, let's find an open space to conduct the summoning experiment. Dake looked around and took Zoo to the door. But when he opened the door, he found that there were many people waiting outside. Teacher Camilla, you haven't gone back yet? Dake looked up slightly and asked Camilla, who was in the crowd. Camilla smiled and said, I can't help it. Deanna insisted on waiting until your experiment was over. Deanna pouted. I want to know the final result. Aurora covered her mouth and laughed. It's really hard not to know the final result. Yeah, Deanna said matter-of-factly. What if I can't sleep at night? Dake scratched his head. Then what about Teacher Cyrus and Teacher Plant? The former director of the Royal Botanical Garden, Miss Plant, smiled and said, Camilla has piqued their curiosity. Cyrus the Silent Sage asked curiously, So it's done? Dake nodded slightly. Although it's not the final summoning, it should be done this time. Cyrus was surprised. I didn't expect you to successfully summon Claire's zoo at such a young age. Dake said humbly. It's because Teacher Claire taught me well. Cyrus leaned on his walking stick and said, You don't mind letting us watch, right? Dake smiled. Of course not. Then, he pushed the door open and walked out slowly. Soon, the group arrived at the open space outside the mansion. Dake used his index and middle fingers as a sword and clamped the zoo tightly. Then he raised his head and slashed the magic card across his chest. In an instant, a large amount of magic power surged. In the name of Dake Dimung, magic card summoning. Field card summon. Zoo. Magic power surged out like a tide. Dake pointed his foot, and the ground around him was covered by a net of magic power. The buildings belonging to the zoo were instantly projected under the effect of true projection. Although it was not as gorgeous and dreamy as Paradise, it was still incredible. The magic and mystery of the field card always made people think of miracles. Of course, the people present would not have such thoughts. Dake looked at the successfully summoned zoo, with excitement in his eyes. Although Paradise was the best, this zoo was the first field card that he had made himself. The meaning behind it was even more different. It was a pity that he only had 8 bird and beast type among his current magical fairies. If he let the little demon beast evolve into a black Duro beast, he could barely have one more. However, this was not enough to build a bird and beast type card set with zoo as the core. Moreover, it was difficult to form a system with just one zoo. He needed to buy more materials to make more zoo. After returning to the academy and learn more series of cards from Claire, Dake did not continue to experiment with the effects of zoo. After a while, he deactivated the zoo. Following the disappearance of the huge building complex, the few tutors also walked over. Ms. Plant clicked her tongue in wonder. I never get tired of looking at a Magus field card. It'll be great if I can get a botanical garden field card. Cyrus the Sage glanced at her and said, I'm afraid that's difficult. There's no universal type for this level of magic card. Ms. Plant couldn't help but raise her voice. Then is it too late to start learning magic now? Cyrus smiled and said, Of course there's still time. There's no end to learning. I'm going to start teaching those cute students some simple magic knowledge in August. You can come and listen in. Ms. Plant raised an eyebrow and said, What a coincidence. I'm also going to start teaching them some grass magic in August. Cyrus narrowed his eyes. Then I really hope Ms. Plant won't use your homework to take up the students' time to learn magic. Especially when I heard that you want them to write some observation diary about the growth of flowers and plants. What can they do with that time? Cough, cough. Cough, cough. Ms. Plant glared at him and did not bother to argue. On the side, Camilla covered her mouth and smiled gently. Deanna and Aurora were surprised. Dake touched his forehead and suddenly asked, Where's Mr. Cook? Camilla smiled. He should have stayed in class. Dake was stunned. It's been more than an hour since the last class ended, right? 2 and 1 4,000 plus. Fell asleep on the table. Chapter 486. Would it still be considered a lesson if they stayed for more than an hour? Dake could not help but feel happy for the magic elves. It was great to have such a serious and responsible teacher, like Madam Cook. Dake turned around and said, Since it's already so late, why don't you all stay for dinner? Sure. Pata. Camilla pressed down on Deanna's head and smiled. It's getting late. My husband must be waiting anxiously, so we won't be staying. Immediately after, Sage Cyrus and Lady Plant expressed the same intention. Dake did not force them to stay. He only said to Deanna, Tomorrow as usual. Deanna's eyes lit up, and she immediately waved. See you tomorrow. Dark waved his hand and said with a smile, See you tomorrow. Tomorrow was Saturday, and it was supposed to be a weekend. However, Yvette did not mention this, so Dake decided on his own. He did not forget that he had promised to bring Deanna and Aurora out for a stroll after zoo was successfully cultivated. Tomorrow was the weekend, and the magic elves were also on holiday, so the 4 tutors would not be coming. In other words, the wide sea allowed the fish to leap, and the wide sky allowed the birds to fly. After such a long period of training and learning, it's time to relax a little. Dake sent Deanna and the others out of the Duke's mansion and returned to the mansion. He glanced at the classroom door of the magic elves, and then slipped away happily. When it was time for dinner, he asked the maid to invite Madam Cook for dinner. Madam Cook could not refuse, so she came to the dining room. Dake took the opportunity to mention the mid-month phase test. Madam Cook understood and agreed on the spot. After that, Dake gave a deep and simple understanding of the learning situation of the magic elves. As he had been busy with his own training and learning, it was inevitable that he would neglect the learning situation of the magic elves. After learning from Madam Cook tonight, it was not much different from what the little demon said. He nodded slightly and told Madam Cook to train the vampire daughter and phoenix girl. If they were not obedient, there was no need to be polite and just call their parents. As he did not lower his volume when he spoke, the magic elves who were gradually getting used to using knives and forks heard him. They were immediately on alert, as if they were on a battlefield. Especially the vampire daughter, whose eyes were sharp as if she was surrounded by enemies. After dinner, Madam Cook and Dake carefully discussed the details of the phase test. Finally, he took out his textbook and recommended Mathematics I to her. After Ms. Cook received Mathematics I, she flipped through it and quickly understood how outstanding this textbook was. She exclaimed in her heart and immediately said, Give me some time to prepare for the lesson. After the test in the middle of the month, I will start using this textbook. Dark had a smile on his face. He was very satisfied. At about 8 o'clock sharp, he summoned the dragon tamer guards and ordered them to send Ms. Cook home. Now that the capital was filled with all sorts of people, it was no longer safe to travel at night. Only with the dragon tamer squad accompanying him could he be at ease. After the carriage left, Dake returned to his mansion. He sat in his bedroom for a while and could not help but go to the classroom, the laboratory. He had been busy with zoo for the past 2 days, so he did not fully focus on actuation armament. Now that zoo was finally completed, he could finally let go of his hands. In order to improve, he even called Meow Meow over. Meow Meow Meow. Meow Meow was also quite excited. The man and the cat quickly prepared for the experiment. Dake's failures during this period were not in vain. He more or less figured out where the problem was and had some confidence in tonight's experiment. Actuation armament. S-core was the drive, but that was only on the surface. For any armament card, the most important thing was the armament itself. When our vet taught actuation armament, she did not need to design the armament itself as a big advantage of actuation armament. She thought that she only needed to design a specific model in her mind, and then use the drive to present it. She herself had always done the same. But after Dake's repeated experiments during this period of time, he found that there was a trap hidden in it. Our vet's talent in refining armament was unparalleled. Her perception and construction of three-dimensional space were also very strong. Otherwise, she would not have been able to develop the three-dimensional triad armament formation. With her innate talent, she could completely construct the rich details of the armament in her mind. But others could not. At least, Dake could not do it at the moment. So he always made mistakes during the refining of actuation armament. Even if he succeeded by chance, the refining of actuation armament was not ideal. So after summing up his experience, Dake decided to overturn our vet's idea and use a relatively clumsy method, which was to make actuation armament and actuation armament themselves and then refine them together. In order to make actuation armament and actuation armament themselves be considered as a whole in the refining process, he added a kind of model thinking to it. That was to imitate those Transformers model toys and achieve this idea by making actuation armament that could be physically transformed into actuation armament. In fact, this was not very difficult. The biggest problem was that the armament made with this method was likely to have the appearance of a boxy robot. Not only would it lack beauty, but it could not be worn close to the body and would also lack flexibility. So when Dake was designing, he simply gave up on the so-called flexibility. Now the definition of armament by the Magus was still only a shell. Since it was all a shell, why must it be worn close to the body? Wouldn't it solve a lot of problems by setting up a cockpit? Just do it. The existence of magical technology was to realize all possibilities. Dake immediately unfolded the blueprint and began to design. There were a lot of giant robots in his memory, but there were too many details for those things, and he did not have that much time to carve them out. And if he wanted to make something like Gundam or Eva, he would obviously need more complicated and rare materials. Although there were a lot of materials in the laboratory, they were all basic materials. So his initial idea was to make some simple toys first. Let's start with that. Dake couldn't help but reveal a gentle smile as the memories of his childhood from his previous life surfaced in his mind. He began to continue the unfinished design on the blueprint. The specific appearance did not need to be exactly the same, but the most important thing was that it could be taken apart and pieced together. The ultimate goal was to use the same parts and assemble them in 2 ways, so that they could be assembled into an armament and an actuator. As for the final product, it was not surprising that the initial experimental product was always accompanied by a large number of deficiencies. Dake spent an hour to complete the rough design, then explained his ideas to Meow Meow in detail. After Meow Meow understood, it opened its eyes wide. Its eyes, which were always half open, widened into round circles. It was obviously very interested. Only with interest could one put their heart into it. This was a good state. Dake then chose a type of magic wood from the material storage as the main material. This type of magic wood was a product of alchemy. It was originally wood, but after being refined by alchemy, it became a special material that was between wood and metal. Therefore, it had the plasticity of wood and the toughness and ductility of metal. And as long as a special magic potion was applied after the carving was completed, it could completely transform into a metal-like material. In terms of the material's strength and rarity, it was not as good as magic steel, but it was more economical. Dake had been using this type of magic wood for the past few days. And Meow Meow would use magic wood to make toys in its free time. Therefore, they were familiar with magic wood. After the blueprint was completed, Dake and Meow Meow began to carve the parts together. The whole process lasted for a full 3 hours. From 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock at night, Dake and Meow Meow maintained a strong interest and did not notice the passage of time at all. When Arvette and Claire returned in the middle of the night, they looked at the door for a while, and then quietly left. Olga made supper again and again, but it all fell into the stomachs of the magic elves. Ding dong. When the clock struck midnight, Dake and Meow Meow finally finished making and painting all the parts. The refreshing feeling of finishing in one go made the man and the cat look at each other and laugh. Then Dake eagerly began to assemble. First was the armament itself. Although there were slight flaws in the joining and the appearance was not perfect, it was indeed joined together. Dake did not expect the final product to be good. This experiment was mainly to verify his idea. He carefully looked at the assembled robot for a while, then took it apart and assembled it into a gun-shaped driver. A gun, not a gun. Although the gun here was supposed to be used for shooting, the core was actually a 6-pointed star emblem of light. But Dake was not a complete copy to begin with. After the final assembly was completed, Dake eagerly picked up the gun and pulled the trigger at the wall. Bang! Meow 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 meow. Meow Meow clung to his trousers and cried. After he made a fake shot, he handed the gun to Meow Meow, who immediately began to play with it excitedly. And Dake himself began to prepare for the completion of the armament. With the finished product, the Triad armament forging was naturally completed. An hour later, Dake finished carving the Triad armament formation above the magic card. Then he used the 3 flowers to stimulate the Triad armament formation. With the Triad armament formation, with the infusion of magic and the power of the mind, the formation was covered in flowing light. Dake closed his eyes and focused his thoughts, pouring the ideas about the armament into his mind as much as possible. When the mind furnace was completed, he asked Meow Meow to bring the gun-shaped driver, and began to smelt it. 15 minutes later, the mind furnace completed its function and was pressed into the magic card. The magic card continued to emit a red and white light, and the internal reaction became more and more intense. Dake and Meow Meow watched nervously until it finally quieted down. Then Dake rinsed the magic card and revealed the halo. What appeared on the card was the gun-shaped driver. Dake tried to inject magic. The information that came back to him made him excited. Let's go. He immediately waved to Meow Meow, picked up the magic card, and ran out of the laboratory excitedly. Not long after, Dake came to the open space outside the mansion. Meow Meow squatted by his feet, looking at the magic card in his hand expectantly. Behind them, Headmaid Molly and Headmaid Olga were quietly leaning against the wall. Seems like the young master's experiment is going well? The 2 maids looked at each other curiously. What kind of armament could Dake make? While they were thinking, they suddenly noticed that Dake had begun to summon, and quickly turned their heads. In the name of Dake Dimung, magic summoning. As the summoning ended, a gun-shaped driver appeared in Dake's hand. He excitedly held the gun, pulled the trigger, and slowly pressed it against the open space. In the process of pressing the trigger, he clearly felt a repulsive force, so he continued to inject magic. As the magic poured in, light gathered above the gun-shaped driver, forming a light emblem with a hexagram engraved on it. Using the light emblem as a bullet, Dake aimed at the open space and pulled the trigger. Bang! The light emblem instantly shot out and rolled on the ground at high speed, drawing a huge hexagram magic circle. Almost at the same time, the gun-shaped driver in Dake's hand turned into light and disappeared. Then, from the hexagram magic circle, a huge robot with red as its main color slowly floated out. It was slightly different from how he imagined it to appear. This huge robot did not transform like the classic transformation scene, but appeared directly. It was a huge robot that was 6 meters tall, the magic king in charge of fire and earth. The light bringer. Meow meow meow. It actually worked. Dake could not help but open his eyes wide. Although the robot in front of him was definitely different from the light bringer, in his memory. But as long as he could summon the wishful godly sword and shout, "Cut in half, wishful godly sword," he felt that it was worth it. As for whether this mech was strong or not, what did it matter? Dake grasped the magic card in his hand tightly, looking excited, until he suddenly realized a very important problem. How to get in. In the original anime, the main character rode a skateboard and rushed into the cockpit while the Lightbringer was transforming. But obviously, he could not do that now. It can't be that I have to crawl in, right? Dake looked at the motionless Lightbringer after being summoned and instantly fell silent. 2 and 1 4,000 plus yesterday. Actually, I don't know much about the Lightbringer, but it doesn't matter as long as I can cut it in half. Chapter 487. The night was quiet. Bathed in the night, the Lightbringer exuded an atmosphere that was out of place in this world. Molly and Olga, who were at the back, couldn't help but feel surprised. What is this? Molly muttered to herself. It's armament, Olga said. Have you seen such an armament before? Molly couldn't help but raise her voice. Haven't I seen it before? Olga revealed a trace of a smile. Ever since he came into contact with magical technology, the young master's light shined brighter and brighter. Perhaps this was the so-called talent. Some people were born with divine strength, while others were good at using swords. The areas they were good at and the areas they weren't good at were two completely different people. The young master must have an extraordinary talent in the field of magical engineering. Remember the website, MVIP can't you? VIP. The sudden appearance of such a huge machine in the Duke's mansion naturally couldn't escape the eyes of others. Just as Yvette and Claire were about to sleep, they smelled the smell and couldn't help but put on their pajamas and went to the corridor. Yvette was in the master bedroom, and Claire's bedroom wasn't far from hers. After the two went out, they looked at each other and went to the nearest window to look outside. In the open space, Dake and Meow Meow were looking up at the Lightbringer, thinking about how to enter it. Meow meow meow. Meow meow waved its claws a few times and suddenly ran forward. Then it ran up the legs of the Lightbringer and climbed to the top of the Lightbringer, and then it felt around. Of course it couldn't find out. After all, the Lightbringer's cockpit was behind the breastplate and not the head. Dake walked to the foot of the Lightbringer and carefully observed for a moment. He took out the flight spell and flew to the breastplate. He tried to touch it with his hand. The moment his palm touched it, he suddenly felt a wave of mana fluctuation. And then he was pulled in by a suction force from the inside. When he stabilized his body again, he was already standing inside the Lightbringer's space. It wasn't a cockpit with a seat or a control panel, but a special space with a hexagram array floating under his feet. Standing in this space, it was as if his entire body had fused with the Light Envoy. There was no need for any joysticks. As long as he willed it, he could make this huge machine move. However, at the same time, the large amount of mana that was flowing out of his body made him realize that it would not be easy to maintain the continuous operation of this body. Compared to normal equipment, the luminous emissary required a lot more energy, and it wasn't just a little. Even Dake, who was used to supplying mana to the magic elves, was having a hard time, not to mention the magic elves that lacked the ability to recover mana. Obviously, it didn't have its own energy core like the moon god's soul eye. Even if it only consumed 30 points of mana per second, it would take 900 points of mana to sustain a single round. Only a magic guide fairy like Phoenix Maiden could drive light envoys for a long time. However, Phoenix wasn't Dake's magic fairy, so in theory, she would be rejected by Light Messenger. Under such circumstances, Unless Dake wanted to launch a self-destruct attack, it wouldn't be suitable for his magic guide fairy to drive, Light Envoy. In other words, he could let the magic elves ride Light Envoy and launch a self-destruct attack. This was obviously a tactic that could be used. The prerequisite was that Light Envoy's strength was worth it. Dake closed his eyes and followed the flow of mana to sense Light Envoy. After mastering Chi, his mana sensing ability had also increased, and he could sense more and more things in detail. After a while, he suddenly opened his eyes, and the Light Envoy took a big step forward. The huge machine that was 6 meters tall stepped down, causing the surrounding ground to tremble slightly. The enormous power contained within was completely revealed. Card name, Magic Gun type, Item card. Effect, Summon Light Envoy. Light Envoy, the Earth Magic King that controls the power of fire and earth. Mana? Attack, 2500, Defense, 2500, Ultimate Skill, Wishful Godly Sword. Come out Wishful Godly Sword. As the information flowed into his mind, Dake stretched out his hand, and the light in his hand gathered into the shape of a sword. A huge red sword was slowly pulled out from the cracked ground by the Light Envoy. He couldn't help but feel a little excited. This Light Envoy was obviously different from the usual equipment. Although the usual equipment was also a shell, it was based on the user's body and increased the attributes of the user. However, this Light Envoy had a fixed attack and defense. Its attack and mana were both 2,500 points, and it had the strength of a full 5-star card. The crafting of an equipment card was much more affected by the materials used compared to the magic elves. The probability of using normal materials to craft a high-level equipment card was almost zero. Similarly, if an equipment card was made with high-level materials, even if it didn't meet expectations, it wouldn't be too bad as long as the crafting was successful. With the materials used to craft this Light Envoy, it was already very rare to be able to craft an equipment card that was close to a 5-star magic elven. As for its actual combat value other than its ornamental and collectible value, it would have to depend on how good the Wishful Godly Sword was. Dake controlled the Light Envoy to raise the Wishful Godly Sword up high. The sword suddenly released a strong golden light, turning the sword into a huge sword of light. Meow. Meow Meow, who was lying on top of the Light Envoy's head, looked at the huge sword of light curiously and tilted its head. Dake stopped his desire to slash with the sword and focused on sensing the information of the Wishful Godly Sword. Wishful Godly Sword, Absolute Cut, attacks ignore the opponent's ability changes, ignores defense and attacks directly, attack plus 500. 500 attack bonus. The strength was equivalent to the Lion King pill, but it didn't have the side effect of reducing rationality. What made it so valuable was the absolute cut, and the ignore defense additional attributes. During the Easter Duel Festival, Dake had already tasted the ignore defense, but that was a small probability of the Holy Sword. This Wishful Godly Sword would definitely ignore defense. Just this attribute alone made it irreplaceable. The only problem was, Dake's heart sank. He let go of his hands, and the Wishful Godly Sword instantly turned into magic dust and disappeared without a trace. The magic consumption is too high. No wonder in the anime, it can only be used for the final attack. Every second, it consumes an extra 100 points of magic. This is great. If I really let the magic elf use it, it can only be a self-destruct attack. Dake rubbed his forehead. He took a step forward and floated out of the Light Envoy's heart protection mirror. The Light Envoy's palm naturally lifted up, allowing him to stand on its palm. He raised his head slightly and looked at the second floor of the mansion. He smiled at Yvette and Claire, and the latter two couldn't help but sigh. Then Meow Meow jumped down from above with a bayou sound, tightly grabbing onto his trousers. You want to try too? Dake lowered his head and asked. Meow. Meow Meow nodded vigorously. Dake smiled slightly, picked it up, and stuffed it into the triangular heart protection mirror. Then the Light Envoy began to move violently. Dake hurriedly used the flight spell to fly into the sky. He saw the Light Envoy suddenly lie down on all fours, and then run happily on the open space. Black lines appeared on his forehead. Fortunately, With Meow Meow's 1,500 points of magic, it couldn't last long. When its magic was about to be exhausted, Dake raised his hand and put the light envoy back into the magic card. Then he reached out and caught Meow Meow, who fell from the sky. At this time, the night was dark, and only a few stars twinkled. It was quite artistic. Yvette jumped down from the corridor at some point and asked curiously, "What kind of weapon is this?" "Earth Devil King," Dake said. "I like to call it the Light Envoy." "The Light Envoy? That light sword does have an extremely strong aura," Yvette pondered. "But it seems to be very different from ordinary weapons?" Dake blinked. "Is it very big?" Yvette smiled. "Very big." Dake looked up at the night sky. "I really hope it's bigger." The successful refining of the Light Envoy gave Dake a lot of confidence. After he returned to his bedroom, he couldn't help but think about refining other weapons. Of course, he knew very well that it would be very difficult to replicate this time. The structure of the Light Envoy was very simple, but the final product was not ideal except for the wishful sword. If he wanted to replicate the stronger bodies in his memory, he was afraid that he would need more time to learn and collect materials. However, the refining of the Light Envoy meant that he had stepped into the next stage of learning the drive armor. Next, he needed to further familiarize himself with and master the two refining methods of the armor and the drive armor. This was what he needed to do in addition to completing other projects. With a trace of excitement, Dake took out the magic brain dropper and stored the great sin that he hadn't extracted that night. It was a little after 12 o'clock. Before 12 o'clock, it was Friday, July 6th. Including this time, there were a total of 6 draws. They were Pride 3 times, Bliss 2 times and Greed 1 time. Remaining reserves Frowny Face Pride. 20 Bliss, 5 Greed. 11 among them, Pride remained. Greed could be used. Dake counted the materials that could be used as the core, and found that there were 4 magic crystal coins that were most compatible with Greed. Maybe I can refine another Meow Meow? Dake couldn't help but look at Meow Meow, who was using wood to carve the Light Envoy, and shook his head. One Meow Meow was already very troublesome, okay? Wouldn't another Meow Meow destroy the roof? Greed's symbol is Saturn, and its corresponding attributes are rock, ground, and ice. In Pokemon, the characteristics that are related to Greed are Gluttonous Ghost, Scavenger, and so on. Let me think: a rock, ground, and ice Pokemon with the characteristics of Gluttonous Ghost. Kettle Kettle? Can I refine another Kettle Kettle? Of course, one couldn't have too many Pokemon like Kettle Kettle. Then what about rock, ground, and ice Pokemon with the characteristics of Scavenger? Little Elephant or Digging Rabbit? Hiss, Dake opened to indoors as he pondered. Zoo and Paradise didn't conflict, but they couldn't be stacked. Among the unrecorded Pokemon, Meow Meow and Lion Beast could enjoy the effects of Zoo. At least when Dake slept, these two Pokemon could leave the Watcher League team. Only after dark had settled everything properly did he crawl into bed. Before going to sleep, he continued to think. If rock, ground, and ice don't work, a general type with universal characteristics might be a feasible idea. And when it comes to Pokemon that are compatible with general types, it's naturally Snorlax. Also like Snake Bear, Bear Cub, and Dashing Bear. Why are they all bears? Dake was suddenly startled, and woke up from the terrifying dream of being squashed by a big bear. Then he subconsciously began to think again. 5 cat plants: cat, cow, fox, lion, and dragon. Cat, cow, fox, lion, and dragon that are compatible with Greed. Which are there? Urgent waiting online. After washing up, he walked to the middle of the bedroom and said to the Pokemon who were still pretending to be asleep, "Pack up, we're going out today." It had been more than a month since they returned to the capital. Whether it was Dake or his Pokemon, they had all been cooped up in the Duke's mansion for a month. Dake didn't mind. He could even stay in the Duke's mansion until school started. But the Pokemon had worked so hard for so long, it was time to compensate them. He might as well take advantage of this trip and bring them out to see the world. But after he announced it, the Pokemon blinked and stared at him as if they had misheard him. Dake took a deep breath and said again with a helpless expression, Pack up, we're going out today. Meow meow meow. Meow meow meow. Meow meow meow. The room was instantly filled with loud and clear meow sounds. Not long after, the maid palace maids rushed into the room and dressed them according to the instructions of the magic elves. Of course, to make it easier for them to move around, they wouldn't dress as grand as the birthday banquet. At most, they would wear a small hat, a small bow tie, a small vest, or a small skirt. Also the Dilu Beast, Fairy Ibu, and so on all had their own small hats and skirts. Dake looked at the Pokemon's excited smiles and couldn't help but smile. Then, he reached out and took a bottle of freshly made candy from Olga. The child's shoulder pole was carried by the father. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. It's the last week of May. Please give me some money, we will adjust the recovery update amount. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.